An archaeologist enters the temple chamber. It's clear that whatever is inside, the people who kept it did not want it found. But there are no chests full of gold and jewels or ancient artifacts piled in the corners. In fact, the room is completely empty, except for one small statue on a pedestal. Upon closer investigation, it is made of green soapstone and appears to be carved into the shape of a seated skeletal figure. It seems harmless, and the archaeologist stares at it until he hears one of his colleagues talking outside. He turns back to answer them before looking back at the statue, which is no longer on its pedestal. The archaeologist panics and calls for someone else to come check this out, but he only manages to get a few words out about the statue's mysterious absence before he starts feeling an odd tightness in his chest. He tries to head for the door, but everything starts going dark. He collapses to the floor, dying instantly. And just as quickly, the mysterious green statue reappears, this time located directly on the chest of the deceased scientist, awaiting its next viewer. SCP-689, also known as the Haunter in the Dark, was first discovered in the early 20th century, as German explorers searched Indian architectural sites for valuable artifacts. The green soapstone statue, only 30 centimeters in height, isn't particularly light, but it's also not large or heavy enough to cause any problems for those looking to take it. Those who have studied it believe that the skeletal figure, which is seated with its hands clasped over its knees, represents an ancient deity of the underworld. After its discovery, the statue's location was briefly unknown, but it was later obtained by the United States Office of Strategic Services from German hands after the end of the Second World War. And that's when its dangerous properties became clear for the first time. While SCP-689 appears to be a standard inert statue, this only holds true if it is being watched by at least one person. When it becomes dangerous is if it is in the presence of a person who watches it, then takes their eyes off the statue. Thankfully, SCP-689's anomalous effects aren't triggered by normal behavior like blinking, but as soon as eye contact is fully broken, like when someone looks away from it completely, the statue will vanish. It will then reappear 15 to 20 seconds later and bring with it a deadly curse. Because each time SCP-689 vanishes, it takes a life. In under 20 seconds, one person who has previously seen SCP-689 and broke eye contact with it will die spontaneously. The cause of death is always some sort of natural cause, but ranges from mundane causes like heart attacks and strokes to sudden ruptures of internal organs, including in some cases, every major organ in the body rupturing at once. If only one person has currently viewed SCP-689 and is alive, the statue will cause their death and immediately appear atop their body. But when there is more than one possible target, the statue becomes far more dangerous. This effect only works on humans, but anyone who has ever viewed the statue is vulnerable. It's as if it keeps a list of everyone who has ever seen it and broken eye contact. And when it has that chance, it starts picking people off that list. And it doesn't matter where in the world they are located. The statue has been shown to be able to teleport long distances and appear on the body of someone who might have viewed it years ago. There seems to be no way to predict in what order the statue will claim its victim. However, a disturbing pattern of who the Haunter in the Dark decides is next has emerged. When the statue has choices available to it, it seems to often target a victim who is in a large crowd. That means that in an instant, hundreds of people could see the statue and become future targets. As if every time an eye is taken off the statue, it could teleport and claim another life. This raises the possibility of a horrific chain effect scenario, where the statue could teleport endlessly and rack up a massive body count in mere minutes. Which is why the Foundation has become determined that it never be seen again. The cell holding SCP-689 is one of the most secure in the entire SCP Foundation, because unlike other Keter-class objects, it gives very little warning. If it is seen, it can be gone in a second with no way of knowing where it is. And depending on how many possible targets are out there, it could be anywhere in the world. That is why it is currently encased in a large concrete chamber surrounded by high-intensity sodium iodide lights. Each of these lights has a separate power supply, so there is no chance of total power failure. And for those tasked with keeping it safe, it's one of the hardest jobs in the Foundation. 3 people are on duty at SCP-689's cell at all times. 2 D-Class personnel are stationed inside the chamber, and a Level 2 agent is stationed in the control chamber. The D-Class agents have one job: to never take their eyes off the statue. They can alternate breaks, but the statue must never be allowed to be unobserved for even a second. And because each person who has seen the statue is a security risk, the D-Class agents are equipped with instant kill devices so they can be terminated from afar rather than being potential targets. The Level 2 agent, meanwhile, has a very difficult job. This is one of the most specialized tasks in the entire Foundation, because the agent must be either blind or equipped with a helmet that completely blocks their vision, which they must wear for their entire SCP-689 shift. All control features in the chamber are designed to be operated by someone without the ability to see, and the operator is not to remove their helmet under any circumstances, or they risk termination themselves as a potential security risk and escape vector. But don't worry, even if the statue still manages to escape its chamber, the Foundation has a plan. Just don't tell staff assigned to 689 what it is. In the event of a containment breach or failure of the lights in the statue's chamber, the first priority is to terminate any D-Class or Level 1 observers who may have been exposed to the Haunter in the dark. This is to reduce potential targets, and while higher-level staff will be retained in most cases, this only goes for the first containment failure. The Foundation will then deploy a retrieval team of blind agents or those wearing vision-blocking headsets. Equipped with echolocation tech, they'll partner with D-Class observers to track down everyone who is known to have viewed the statue. The statue will invariably appear and lead to the death of one of these people, so knowledge of these potential targets is key to containment. Then comes the challenge of returning it to containment. As soon as the statue is located, a perimeter is established with coverings put up to avoid any outside viewers catching a glimpse of it. The D-Class observers enter the perimeter and are transported back to the facility together to ensure it never falls out of sight until it is safely back in its chamber and its containment protocols are put back in place. But what is actually known about this deadly statue? Because of how dangerous and fast-moving the statue is, any attempts to study its properties must be approved by the presiding scientist and are carefully scrutinized. The curiosity to figure out its mysteries is always tempered by the fact that any scientist interested may be subject to summary termination should it breach containment again. Its origins are unknown, but it is thought to be at least several centuries old, and its form is believed to be based on a god of the underworld. This would explain its one function, ensuring people make a swift visit to the afterlife. It does not seem to have any direct hostility towards humans or SCP personnel, and has not given any indication that it is sapient or intelligent, but it does seem to want to spread as quickly as possible, and it may be able to sense where its best targets with the greatest potential to spread are located. This has led many to compare it to one of the SCP Foundation's most notorious residents. SCP-173 is another statue that poses a grave danger to anyone who looks at it the right way. Similar to SCP-689, it is frozen in place and requires anyone who enters its containment unit to look directly at it. Any breaking of eye contact can be deadly, and it's more strict in its definition of breaking eye contact than 689 is. Simply taking your eyes off for even a second, even to blink, is enough to seal your fate. But SCP-173 doesn't use supernatural powers to claim its victim. This large concrete statue instead becomes mobile and extremely violent when eye contact is broken, killing its targets by strangulation or breaking the neck. While this entity has killed many personnel since its containment, it doesn't seem to have the same ability of SCP-689 to teleport to a completely different location, which means it is actually less of a threat than the Haunter in the dark. But the two statues' similar MO of killing when eye contact is broken has led some to speculate a connection, despite one being of modern construction and the other being old, possibly even ancient. But one of these statues poses a potential end-of-the-world scenario, which is why the Foundation is so concerned about SCP-689 breaching containment. SCP-689 might just be among the hardest anomalies to get back in the bottle once it escapes. If it appears far outside containment, in a crowded scene, it now has hundreds of new potential targets. By the time the Foundation tracks it down to its past location, it will have likely teleported again, and there seems to be no limit to how many lives it can claim in a set time. That means that as it racks up more targets and teleports into crowds, it could escalate into a major threat to Earth's entire population. with SCP-689 seeming to be able to kill anything that breaks eye contact with it. There are some in the Foundation who wonder if it should be used against the most notorious captive of the SCP Foundation, SCP-682. This rage-filled, indestructible, regenerating beast has been a thorn in the Foundation's side for years. It has cost countless lives of agents and personnel with its many containment breaches, and so far the Foundation has been unable to terminate it by any conventional means. But SCP-689 isn't exactly what you would call conventional means. It simply triggers an invariably fatal reaction within the body of whoever it targets, which means it could possibly be the only thing that could kill SCP-682 permanently. The risks of pitting these two anomalies against each other are immense though. Not only does any interaction with SCP-682 carry risks of yet another catastrophic containment breach, but moving the volatile SCP-689 puts everyone, not just those in the Foundation, at risk too. The proposed plan involves exposing the two, then immediately turning off the lights. But for this experiment to be pulled off safely, every personnel who has seen SCP-689 must either be terminated or placed in the same containment chamber, giving the statue no choice but to eventually choose SCP-682. To improve the chance of success, the doctors planning this operation have suggested terminating all D-Class personnel in advance to better the odds. Should this experiment ever be approved though, a failure could be truly catastrophic. SCP-682 has already shown itself to be able to come back from things that are seemingly impossible to survive, including having the majority of its body destroyed with only atoms remaining, and yet it was still able to regenerate back. Who's to say it couldn't survive a heart attack or organ rupture too? There is also the risk of 682 gaining the power used against it. The only thing worse than SCP-682 is an SCP-682 that can now teleport around the world to kill anyone who has ever looked at it. But even with these risks, the experiment has not been officially ruled out. Could one of the Foundation's deadliest Keter-class anomalies be the solution to another? It's under advisement, but for right now, the Foundation is keeping a very close eye on SCP-689, in more ways than one.
It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation archives are filled with some terrifying monsters. Even the deadliest creatures can, in theory, be defeated, or at least soundly avoided. After all, they're just flesh and blood, or in some cases, metal or concrete. But what if reality as you know it one day just broke? Or worse, you were transported to a reality so frightening and alien to our own that death seemed like the only escape, but you couldn't even give yourself that. This brings us to today's topic, the terrifying alternate reality of SCP-3001. The Foundation is no stranger to freaky alternate dimensions, but what was experienced by Joint Lead Researcher Dr. Robert Scranton at Site-120 is a truly unique nightmare. Co-managed by his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, Site-120 is a facility largely designated for research into SCPs with dangerous reality warping capabilities in order to mitigate future containment breaches. Reality warpers are among some of the more perplexing and dangerous SCPs, from the pocket dimension creating SCP-106 to the SCP creating Dr. Wondertainment and everything in between. Scranton and Lang's goal to further study such entities was an admirable one, if a little overambitious. And on January 2, 2000, during the testing of a new technology created by the Foundation's leading power couple, disaster finally struck. Scranton and Lang had already been the brains behind one of the Foundation's most valuable tools in the fight against reality-bending SCPs, the Scranton Reality Anchors. Their follow-up, the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer, or LSS, likely would have been an even more advanced variant of their earlier invention, and should have been a huge success for the team. But things didn't turn out that way. Dr. Scranton and several other researchers were gathered in Reality Lab A performing routine tests on the LSS prototypes. While other technicians ran diagnostics tests, Scranton stood at the control panel, the blinking red light above the console confirming that everything was going according to plan. But as anyone who's fallen victim to one of the Foundation's many anomalies will tell you, just because you've done everything correctly doesn't mean you're safe. Scranton began operating the machine, not knowing that something was rumbling up towards him from below. Without warning, a sudden, unexpected burst of seismic activity rocked the entire base. Researchers grabbed onto whatever was closest as the world shook around them. In his panic, Dr. Scranton clung to the LSS control panel as the seismic blast fried the circuits and kicked it into overdrive. There was a blast of magnificent blinding light, and when the rumbling stopped, not only was the doctor gone, he had been erased from reality as we know it. The earthquake had caused a deadly malfunction in the machine meant to stabilize reality, and instead tore a rift in it, dragging the unfortunate doctor and the control panel into oblivion. His wife, Dr. Lang, and the many researchers who idolized him were devastated by his unexpected demise at the hand of what should have been his crowning achievement. The one silver lining was that this reality-ripping event had almost definitely eliminated the doctor quickly and painlessly. As far as the Foundation and his loved ones were concerned, Scranton's death had been immediate and complete, a luxury afforded to few Foundation employees who die anomalous deaths. But sadly, that isn't how Dr. Scranton's story, or the story of SCP-3001, ends. No, this is where it all begins. How do we know all this? In the hellish new place where Scranton had been transported, the control panel from the LSS that he'd been clinging to for dear life had been transported with him, and continued to record audio data from this anomalous location. Not that Dr. Scranton realized it, not at first anyway. As far as he knew, he'd suddenly been transported into a pitch-black location. No sights, no sounds, no sense. True nothingness. At first, the doctor was confused. One second he was testing out his new technology, and the next he was quite literally nowhere. In spite of his current situation, the doctor was still an intelligent and rational man. He took a moment to compose himself, hoping that in time his eyes would adjust to the new darkness around him. But that moment never came. The darkness remained perfectly absolute. Much like the darkness in another reality-defying SCP, the deadly endless staircase known as SCP-087, the dark seemed thick, almost like you could touch it. The doctor, not wanting to give himself to despair and die in this impossible place, and with no other options seemingly available, began walking. Either he'd find his way out, or the Foundation would find him. No need to panic. It may have altered the doctor's temperament if he knew that the Foundation already assumed he was dead, and that no search party was going to come looking for him. Still, logic dictates that if a person walks for long enough, they're bound to find something. The problem Scranton was about to face was that SCP-3001 doesn't run by any kind of conventional logic. He walked and walked and walked, but he didn't seem to get any nearer to or farther from anything. But how could he even know? After all, in total darkness, there aren't any landmarks to assist in navigation. The doctor walked and paced and screamed for days on end, but he made no progress. He was alone in an empty world. He had no choice though, so he kept walking and walking and walking for 11 days. During that time, he felt his hunger and thirst grow. He was in terrible pain from a mix of starvation and dehydration, but the release of death didn't seem to come for him. He was going to have to learn the rules of this new place the hard way, and it grimly dawned on Dr. Scranton that dying in this place might not even be the worst possible outcome. He paced and repeated facts to himself, hoping to ground himself in the moment and avoid the panic that could so easily set in. Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. Little by little, the words seemed to turn to nonsense in his mouth as the terror grew. Just as he felt like he was about to lose his mind, he noticed something. A small oasis in the endless darkness of SCP-3001. The glowing red light on the LSS control panel. Where had it come from? And how was it still recording? The doctor had no idea, but he was grateful for any kind of familiarity in this strange darkness around him. Perhaps the LSS could be the key to saving him, or at least figuring out what on earth was going on here. Whatever the case, there was no denying that having the panel here was better than nothing. At least, when it was found, if it was ever found, then people would know what had happened to him. As the days passed and he continued to mysteriously survive, Dr. Scranton deduced that one didn't need food or water to survive continually in SCP-3001. The location had an anomalous effect on its inhabitants. As the days passed and turned to weeks of wandering in the darkness, Dr. Scranton further deduced that he was no longer in his home dimension. This was an entirely separate pocket dimension, much like the one possessed by SCP-106, but featureless, a perfect self-contained void. Now dimly illuminated by the red light of the panel, Dr. Scranton explored further into the void around him. He traveled for months on end, the pain of his deficiencies growing by the day, but found he was getting nowhere. All things considered, he wasn't even sure he was moving, or whether reality and darkness were swirling around him like a thick liquid. Rather than walking on a single flat surface, he was moving in all directions across a three-dimensional plane. The space-time continuum appeared to be entirely broken here, where movement is more defined by the conscious intention to move than any real geographical repositioning. Dr. Scranton knew that this place broke every single one of Kijel's laws of reality parameters. And from his years working with a plethora of reality warpers in Site-120, he had a theory for why this pocket dimension was so strange. It had an extraordinarily weak Hume field. Before we get back to Dr. Scranton's semi-living nightmare, we need a quick primer on Hume theory and why having a weak Hume field is such a problem. A Hume is a unit of measurement for the strength and amount of reality in a given location or being. In an area with an incredibly low Hume field relative to our world, such as SCP-3001, universe breaches and anomalous incidents rise significantly. At the time of his being trapped there, SCP-3001 had the lowest number of Humes in any recorded environment, making it a phenomenally anomalous zone. It was for this reason that starvation and dehydration never took hold of him despite causing him great pain. And the worst by far was yet to come. Dr. Scranton wasn't trapped in this dimension for weeks or even months. He was trapped in the darkness for years, and it took a nightmarish toll on his body and mind. The small flashing red light on his LSS control panel became his only friend, and as the years drew on, he would hold entire conversations with his only source of illumination. He knew that his days were numbered. If he didn't escape the dimension within around 3 years, the Hume field would diffuse further, and he would be left in a truly horrific state. But based on how little headway he'd made in the time he'd been there, he didn't feel optimistic. He kept speaking into the recorder, if only to break the silence and prevent him from going completely insane. But even that would only hold it off for so long. Alone and talking to himself endlessly in the darkness, Dr. Scranton could feel his mind slipping as the confines of the pocket dimension constricted and his body began to change. The low Hume field slowly diffused his physical matter, destroying the physical integrity of his body, but never being merciful enough to actually let him die. In his haunting audio logs, the doctor described his hands as diffusing and thinning out like spiderwebs. Over time, there was less and less of him, and what was left wasn't entirely human. As Scranton's Hume level lowered to equalize with that of SCP-3001, the lines between his body and the LSS control console began to blur in a twisted marriage of warped flesh and machine. The Lang-Scranton stabilizer was anything but stable. Before his mind and body became something else entirely, the doctor still had the presence of mind to finally realize how he'd come to be in this terrible place. The LSS had opened a wormhole known as a Class C broken entry into a paradoxical pocket dimension between layers of reality and taken him through it. He'd slipped through a crack in reality into absolute darkness, and now he was stuck with a fate far worse than death. How do we know any of this? Much like the event in the first place, it's a total accident. Testing superior reality-bending technology almost 6 years after the disappearance caused the sudden return of the missing LSS to Site-120's reality labs. The only trace of Dr. Scranton that it brought back with it was the blood and viscera that coated the console, much to the abject horror of his still-grieving wife, Dr. Anna Lang. To this day, Dr. Scranton, formerly one of the Foundation's brightest minds, remains trapped in the nightmare of SCP-3001. His current condition, whether the Doctor is still alive after 20 years of being warped by the low Hume field of 3001's darkened confines, is still unknown. But for the Doctor's own sake, we hope he's been dead for quite some time, because few things on Earth are as horrifying as the alternative. The first thing that tipped the Foundation off to SCP-087's presence were the reports of numerous unexplained disappearances on campus. There were plenty of rumors about what might be behind them, but field agents suspected that the true source of the vanishing would be something beyond civilian imagination. All anyone knew for sure was that everyone who had gone missing was last seen in a certain administrative building on the university grounds, and that the disappearances only seemed to happen when the elevator was out. The campus was soon flooded with Foundation agents, creating a barrier around the administrative building and the presumed habitat of SCP-087. Nobody else could get in, and hopefully whatever was inside couldn't get out. One of the Foundation's lead scientists was flown in to consult on the investigation. What could have been behind those students disappearing? The doctor's preliminary interviews with university staff who worked in the building yielded some interesting details. Strange noises, like banging and even a faint, shrill crying, would be heard from a door that led to a no longer used stairway in hallway 3B. Staff in the building had no reason to ever take these stairs, especially considering how many of them reported a strange sense of unease when just standing outside the dorm. The only reason someone might take those stairs is due to elevator malfunctions. In that instant, the doctor had put it all together. The staff they interviewed had their memory wiped with amnestics, special chemicals used by the Foundation with the power to delete human memories. The Foundation only used them for staff or civilians who had confirmed contact with an SCP, and the doctor knew that they had a live one on their hands. The staircase. There was something terribly wrong with that staircase, and it was the SCP Foundation's job to find out what, before it made anybody else disappear. This is the story of SCP-087, otherwise known as the Endless Staircase, and the 3 doomed journeys down into its murky depths. The doctor was more than eager to begin research into the staircase and its frightening, anomalous properties. After all, you don't claw your way up to being one of the Foundation's key researchers without being brave, and perhaps just a little bit deranged. As was standard, once a perimeter was secured around the staircase, the good doctor requested a selection of D-Class personnel for testing. For those not in the know, D-Class is the Foundation's polite way of saying cannon fodder. The doctor was sent 3 D-Class prisoners for use in his investigation of SCP-087. The first, D-8432, was, according to official documentation on the incident, a 43-year-old male of average build and appearance and unremarkable psychological background. This man once worked for the Foundation in a more official capacity, but he was given the often deadly demotion to D-Class due to a dangerous mistake handling SCP-682 that led to the deaths of several other agents. Now, it looked like it would be his turn. The doctor explained his mission to him: explore the staircase, gather data, help us find out exactly what we're dealing with here. If you come back alive, there may even be a promotion in it for you. And with that promise, D-8432 was given his loadout, a 75-watt flood lamp with battery power capable of lasting 24 hours, an audio headset, and a handheld camcorder fitted with a transmission stream, and an audio headset that would allow him to communicate with Dr. Bright. D-8432 was then pushed through the door in hallway 3B and out onto the staircase. According to declassified Foundation files describing the staircase, SCP-087 is an unlit platform staircase. Stairs descend on a 38-degree angle for 13 steps before reaching a semicircular platform of approximately 3 meters in diameter. Descent direction rotates 180 degrees at each platform. The design of SCP-087 limits subjects to a visual range of approximately 1.5 flights. But in D-8432's mind, unlit really didn't seem like the right word. He would have chosen all-consuming darkness. Despite carrying a powerful 75-watt lamp, D-8432 was only capable of partially lighting the platform he was standing on, and the illumination only stretched down 9 of the 13 steps to the next platform. When D-8432 observed how little help his lamp was giving him, he was instructed to shine it out of the doorway into hallway 3B. When he did so, the light seemed to shine far further than it ever could in SCP-087. Already, the beginning of the anomalous activity was obvious. Everywhere else, darkness is just the absence of light. In SCP-087, darkness eats light. It was like a tangible black mass that only a certain amount of light could survive, while the rest just wouldn't show. D-8432 swallowed hard over a lump in his throat. The door to hallway 3B was closed behind him, and he was ordered to descend. Surviving to see that promotion was feeling unlikely, but it's not like he had a choice. If he tried to escape SCP-087 before he was permitted, he'd be shot by SCP Foundation field agents on the spot. So he followed the high-ranking doctor's orders and began to descend the steps to the next platform. Nothing about the physical makeup of the staircase itself seemed abnormal. The base and walls were a very plain, dull concrete with a metal handrail. The only thing that seemed unique about it so far was the strange light-bending properties. That was, until he reached the second platform down and he heard it, a soft, echoing cry. A child's cry. It was shrieks of panic, or maybe even pain, echoing up from below. He was asked why he had stopped, and he explained the crying sound he'd been hearing. It sounded like it was coming from far down the stairs, maybe 200 meters below him. He could just make out the words, "please," "help," and "down here," coming from the darkness. But the team outside the stairwell couldn't hear anything, so they asked him to descend further. Another platform down, and they could hear it too, the unmistakable cries of a terrified child. "Please, help," and "down here." D8432 was ordered to keep going, and only stop if he noticed changes to the visual environment or in the sounds he was hearing. D8432, knowing his life was on the line, had to keep going, and descended another 20 flights of stairs before stopping to remark that the sounds of the child hadn't gotten any closer. They still sounded just as far away as when he'd first heard them. He was told his observations were noted and pressured to continue. Within half an hour, D8432 had descended a full 50 floors with no sign of a bottom in sight. Somehow, the volume of the child's crying had remained consistent throughout, as if it was moving away from D8432 at the same rate he was descending. At this point, D8432 reported that he was feeling uneasy. The doctor said that this was understandable, given the circumstances. He'd been watching what little there was to see over a live video feed the entire time, and something about the truly bottomless nature of the staircase and the ever-elusive crying was undeniably eerie. But things were about to really take a turn for the worst. As D8432 stepped forward towards the next set of stairs, he froze. There was something on the platform below him, barely illuminated by the light of his 75-watt bulb. It was a face, vaguely human in size and shape, but with a few terrifying differences. It had grayish skin and no mouth, nostrils, or pupils. And yet, D8432 could feel that this thing was making eye contact with him. He couldn't move, trapped in the thing's piercing gaze. In an instant, the face jerked forwards, suddenly only about a foot away from D432's face, eyes staring into its own. D8432 screamed and ran, scaling all 50 flights in an astonishing 18 minutes before charging out into hallway 3B. There, he collapsed from the exhaustion and the fear of what he'd just seen. Upon reviewing the footage, the strange face was designated SCP-087-1. Fascinating. It was time for a second experiment. The doctor just had to know more. The second test subject was D9035, a 28-year-old male with a history of aggravated assaults against women. He was given the same loadout as his predecessors, except this time with an even more powerful 100-watt bulb. He was also given 100 small LED lights that had adhesive backs and a battery life of approximately 3 weeks, with which they intended to permanently illuminate SCP-087. However, despite the extra wattage of his bulb, he still couldn't illuminate beyond the 9th step. SCP-087 wouldn't allow it. Having no ideas of the horrors that lurked below him, he descended on the doctor's orders and began fixing the LEDs to the walls of each platform he passed. The LED always illuminated the landing, but the light couldn't pass the first step on either side. The flights of stairs themselves would remain in perpetual darkness. After the second flight, D9035 noticed the same crying D8432 had heard and became uneasy. Just like before, as D9035 descended, the volume of the crying didn't seem to increase, as if for every step he descended, the source of the crying descended 1, 2, keeping them at a constant 200 meters apart. Still, he was ordered to continue his descent and the placing of LEDs even as his paranoia grew. When he reached the 51st floor, he observed damage to the wall and steps. Sections appeared to have been smashed to rubble by an extreme force. As he descended past the broken step, he only felt his fear, anxiety, and paranoia grow. The doctor made note of the fact that SCP-087 seemed to cause instances of anxiety and terror in its occupants, even before they encountered SCP-087-1. As D9035 reached Platform 89, a full 350 meters under the initial platform, he stopped dead in his tracks and saw something staring up at him from the platform below. That same terrible gray face with those dead, white eyes. He was encouraged to stay calm and try to get better footage of the face, but it charged for him, and D9035 ran for his life. He ascended the staircase at a staggering pace, even passing out from exhaustion and remaining motionless for 14 minutes halfway. When D9035 finally gathered the strength to get up, he scrambled back to hallway 3B and fell into a state of catatonia. He remains unresponsive to all external stimuli to this day, just staring off into the distance with a haunted expression, almost like he's still there in the hallway. The doctor wanted to conduct one more test before he ordered SCP-087 shut off from the world forever, and it was the most terrifying of all. The final subject was D9884, a 23-year-old woman with a history of depression and use of excessive force. The doctor had hoped that D9884 would travel the deepest yet, and so he gave her the additional supplies of a backpack containing 3.75 liters of water, 15 nutrient bars, and 1 thermal blanket. As far as the Foundation was concerned, she was in this for the long haul, but none of them had any idea quite how right they were. When D9884 entered SCP-087, all the lights from the previous expedition had disappeared. Still, she was ordered to go deeper. She heard the crying of the mysterious child, if it was even a child at all, and again she was ordered to go deeper. At the 496th landing, even as D9884 seemed to slip into a state of mortal terror, once again she was ordered to go even deeper. Every moment, he was hoping to get a better look at the face of SCP-087-1, and when D9884 finally broke and fled back upstairs, he did. The face appeared, but this time, it was mere inches behind her, staring directly into the camera with its blank eyes, startling even this veteran of the supernatural. The face appearing caused D9884 to panic and flee, but instead of going back up the stairs to safety, she went deeper down the staircase in an attempt to escape it, deeper and deeper and deeper, until her video feed cut out. D9884 was never seen again. In the aftermath of the tests, the SCP was classified as Euclid. It may have been dangerous, but at least it was easy to contain. The door to hallway 3B was replaced with one made out of reinforced steel with an electro-release lock mechanism. It has been disguised to resemble a janitorial closet consistent with the rest of the building. The lock won't release unless a classified number of electrical volts are applied, while the key is turned counterclockwise. And after a few inches of foam insulation were applied to the inner side of the door, staff at the building never again reported hearing strange noises. As for the fates of those lost within the endless turning flights and platforms of SCP-087, we may never know, but one can only assume it isn't pleasant. Does the Black Moon howl? No, not yet. See the boy. He was born in a time before names. There weren't enough humans around to need them back then. He was one of a handful occupying a coastal village, using a tongue long since dead. They eked out a simple life, hunting, gathering, fishing. The only thing on most of their minds was surviving to see the next sunrise. Yes, a simple life, free of complications. Until the hermit appeared. The boy would remember this man for eternity. Haggard and thin, skin weathered by time and pain. A man that, emaciated, walking with a long, gnarled cane that honestly looked healthier than he did, shouldn't be alive. Even the boy, who had scarcely seen beyond the bounds of his village, knew that the hermit was unnatural, an aberration, an anomaly. He walked into the center of the village, sat down on a large stone, and waited. Nobody dared ask his business, nor what the hermit waited for. Then, a few days later, the Black Moon howled. The boy saw the village's youngest hunter freeze one evening while out on a walk. Not simply stand still, but freeze. Then for an instant, he became solid black, a coal statue, and as soon as he'd changed, he was gone. Obliterated, not a trace of him remained. Such is the power of the Black Moon. It can make any conscious being disappear in an instant, turn black, then wiped from our plane of existence, never to be seen again. Its choice of victims seemed, at each instance, to be utterly random, but it would come for all who lived eventually. This is known to some as the howling of the Black Moon. Later that same night, the boy found himself talking to the hermit, who asked with small, frantic eyes what he had seen. When the boy told him, he let out a deep, rattling sigh. The boy, curious, asked him if he knew about the nightmare he'd just witnessed. The hermit looked up.
He'd been the first one in the hermit's millennia of pursuit that had ever asked. In that moment, he knew that he had found his successor in the hunt for the death of ages. The hermit told the boy it went by many names: the Great Finale, the Pale King, but most common of all was the Black Moon. The entity existed beyond the veil of our reality, a creature of pure energy, though nobody could really be sure of its true nature. The hermit had been tracking it, learning about it, and trying to destroy it for thousands of years. And yet it only took him 4 pathetic minutes to tell the boy everything he knew. The boy, knowing still that something about the hermit was unnatural, asked how he came to be in this position. The hermit told the boy he was the counterbalance, a kind of chosen one, destined to face and perhaps even defeat the Black Moon someday. The counterbalance receives a number of truly extraordinary gifts for inheriting the responsibility: eternal life, eternal youth, near physical immortality. But they will be haunted by their purpose, doomed to watch everyone they love die around them, as they continue to hunt their only true equal and opposite, the Black Moon itself. The hermit in his own eyes had failed at his duty. He had grown weary, and now he needed to pass the duty of counterbalance on to another. That other would be the boy. He felt a sudden and profound change, along with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. He was no longer just the boy. Now, he was the counterbalance. He watched the hermit give him a slight nod of respect and then crumble into dust before his eyes. The boy, the counterbalance, looked up at the sky and saw the stars twinkling, so bright and so beautiful. Little did he know his battle with the Black Moon would outlast every single one of them. Does the Black Moon howl? Not without blood. The boy grew into a man as his village aged and then died around him. Decades passed, then centuries, then millennia. Tens of thousands of years watching humanity develop and grow around him as he continued his pursuit of that one elusive foe. As science and diagnostic technology gained ground, absorbing and then evolving beyond all the old superstitions, the counterbalance gained a better understanding of the Black Moon, though even then, it still remained essentially a stranger. The entity was entropic, a being of pure randomness and chaos without consistent form. It didn't exist in our universe, but it could exercise its influence here with so-called obliteration events, much like the horrible fate that befell the young hunter from the village. But that was only the proverbial tip of the iceberg. The counterbalance tracked and noted obliteration events. They were exceedingly rare at first, something that occurred once every 1,000 years or so, like a terrible curse. But he couldn't help but notice a concerning trend emerging. It started happening once a century, then once a decade. He could feel the terrible future stretching out in front of him. How, over their shared eternity, the Black Moon would gain more and more ground. Would there come a day where it took someone once a year, once a month, a week, a day, an hour, a minute, a second? It'd spell the end of all conscious life, a total victory for the Black Moon, the end of the universe, the death of ages, a complete existential obliteration. He was swept up in a sobering realization. He couldn't win this fight alone. However, while his hunt for the Black Moon had been largely fruitless, the counterbalance had discovered many other things along the way: strange creatures, objects with extraordinary powers, and events that couldn't be explained with rational science. Perhaps something about these oddities, these anomalies, would hold the key to defeating his timeless enemy. And it hadn't just been these objects, entities, and events. He'd also discovered some truly exceptional people on his travels, minds and skills that rivaled even his own, despite his age. Perhaps they would be the ones to help him win. With the 13 most brilliant and trusted people the counterbalance ever met, he decided to form a council. And from this council, they forged and directed an organization dedicated to understanding and counteracting the strange in all its forms. with the secret hope that their search into darkness would yield the answer to the Black Moon's downfall. He called it the SCP Foundation. They would secure the anomalous, contain it, and protect all of humanity from its influence. The Counterbalance also took on a new title, befitting of his new role, the Administrator. And even the Black Moon itself was given a moniker, in hopes of robbing it of some of its frightening power. SCP-001. Does the Black Moon howl? Only at the blind. The year was now 1987. The SCP Foundation had been operating for over a century, and thanks to their secret possession of anomalous wisdom and technology, their own advancement was thousands of years ahead of the rest of humanity. While there still wasn't a silver bullet solution to the Black Moon, and its deadly howls were becoming all the more frequent as the decades went on, the Foundation did have some irons in the fire to combat it. Their ability to gather intel on both the entity itself and its obliteration events had improved considerably, thanks to their new global information network. Their top minds were also working on a highly classified device known as the Singular Conceptual Bunker, which may one day come in handy for combating the extra-dimensional entity directly. But the most valuable piece of information they ever gathered about the Black Moon was this: it couldn't howl when it was being watched. The very act of engaged observation defanged it. The problem is, how can you observe something that doesn't technically exist inside your own reality? In order to pull this off, the Foundation would need to get extremely creative. Thankfully, creative solutions to strange problems are the Foundation's specialty. Flash forward to 1993. Enter Dr. Moto, a brilliant young scientist and conceptual engineer working for the SCP Foundation. With the administrator's consultation, he started the Key Project, an arm of the wider Project Oromasdes, the umbrella initiative for using modified anomalous objects in the battle against the Black Moon. The goal of the Key Project was relatively simple. If people couldn't observe the Black Moon directly, then the Foundation could make proxies of the Black Moon that could be observed, almost like a kind of voodoo doll. These new anomalies would only need to satisfy 3 criteria: the inability to operate when being observed, a hostility to conscious life, and the ability to end conscious life of their own volition when not being observed. Through conceptual engineering, a link theoretically could be forged between these objects and the Black Moon, allowing observation of them to stop the obliteration events. However, despite being a good idea in theory, Dr. Moto's efforts were marred with errors and tragedies. One object wasn't deadly enough, simply appearing behind people in a threatening pose when they weren't looking. Another one killed purely through collateral damage, a giant sculpture of a human head that immediately attempted escape by barging through Site-01, the Center for Anti-Black Moon Operations, and killing 19 people in the process. Another one of Moto's objects, a huge black sphere, simply immediately exploded, killing 12 people. And in the most horrific misstep of all, one of Moto's objects caused a mass death event in a nearby hotel, where 142 people were spontaneously incinerated when the object, a series of interlocking stalactites and stalagmites, were left unobserved for 0.2 seconds. Almost all of Moto's objects were terminated in the aftermath, either being too useless or too dangerous to keep around. The young scientist felt a deep shame, but forged on. He made one truly brilliant creation that satisfied all the criteria: a sculpture, incapable of moving while being watched, but would snap the neck of the nearest conscious entity if it left unobserved for even a fraction of a second. Its relatively minimal killing left it easy to contain without causing mass deaths, and despite all of the other deaths that had sadly occurred during the Key Project, Dr. Moto believed that the lives saved in the long run by stopping the Black Moon's howls would justify the sacrifice. The problem is, the Key Project didn't stop anything. Not long after this, there was the first recorded double obliteration event in Rome, where a young tourist couple had both been obliterated simultaneously. All the deaths in the Key Project had been for nothing. The Black Moon was only getting more powerful. The shame and the guilt was too much for Dr. Moto. He left a note in his office reading, "We've been looking at nothing. I'm sorry, Administrator. I failed you, sir." Moto's corpse was later found in the sculpture's temporary containment chamber. His neck snapped. The key project was, in summary, shut down and its one surviving creation transported to Site 19 in late 1993, where it was designated as SCP-173. Another painful failure for the administrator. Back to the drawing board once more. Does the Black Moon howl? Not while the stars shine. Millennia stretched on. Almost everyone died except the administrator thanks to his gift. Or perhaps curse, as the counterbalance to the Black Moon. Science marched on. The SCP Foundation marched on. But all this progress, all this power, was nothing against the incomprehensible influence of SCP-001. The Black Moon was howling more frequently than ever, all the way up to the year 3156, when the Foundation launched the SEEK project under the support of Project Oromastes. As more and more people were wiped out in frequent obliteration events, the administrator became painfully aware that perhaps the answers to the Black Moon problem wouldn't be found on Earth. Using state-of-the-art technology, with a little help from the anomalous, the SCP Foundation began work on an autonomous spacefaring vessel that could search the stars for the key to the Black Moon's destruction. It was an awe-inspiring creation. A huge craft powered by artificial intelligence with a universal translator, cryogenic units, and hundreds of autonomous drones to perform more targeted searches. SEEK was waved off into the unforgiving depths of space. The administrator could only hope that it would come back with worthwhile answers. The first of the three notable planets SEEK arrived on was one theoretically capable of supporting human life, except for its brutal and constant blizzards and snowstorms. When SEEK's drones were deployed, they did discover signs of civilization based around sentient spherical creatures, but no signs of actual life remained. Records and statues found across the planet seem to indicate that the Black Moon was responsible for the destruction of the planet's civilization, causing so many obliteration events that the remaining survivors went mad from the fear and stress, leading to mass death in the ensuing chaos. The next planet was discovered centuries later, in the year 3499. While this planet could also theoretically support human life, it suffered from frequent volcanic eruptions that rendered much of its surface a flaming mess. However, there were still the dormant ruins of a once advanced civilization of conscious beings. Much like the prior planet, they'd been driven extinct by Black Moon obliteration events a century before the SEEK even arrived. Unlike the last planet, however, it seems that they accepted their fate and went gently into the night. The planet was now overrun by billions of armored bat-like creatures that operated on pure instinct, and thus were not considered conscious enough to be obliterated. The final planet was reached in 3764, and was the most fruitful of the three discoveries. This planet was hyper-advanced, fully urbanized, and covered in sprawling megacities, with records and technology over 1,000 years ahead of Earth. Before the Black Moon killed almost all of them, there were a species of humanoid telepathic fungi, and had developed an awareness of the Black Moon's existence that was on par with that of humanity's. They even had their own equivalent of the SCP Foundation actively working on countermeasures. And most amazingly of all, SEEK found one surviving member of the species on the planet, cryogenically frozen. The craft was immediately instructed to collect the survivor and return home for interrogation. The administrator was preparing for what could be the most important conversation since he met the Hermit all those thousands of years ago. Does the Black Moon howl? Only when waning. When the surviving creature, codenamed Sage, was returned to Earth, the administrator was eager to finally speak with it. Like the rest of its now extinct species, Sage spoke through powerful telepathic mind waves, which only the administrator, thanks to his counterbalance abilities, was able to receive at close range without being harmed. Incidentally, it wasn't long until the very fact of the administrator's nature as a counterbalance came up in the mental conversation. Sage could tell, just by being in his presence. They discovered a number of vital truths over their brief time communicating. That Sage's survival had been pure luck, for starters. The Black Moon is still very much capable of obliterating conscious beings in an unconscious state. The administrator also learned that he was merely the latest in an extremely long line of counterbalances across time, space, and species. Though everyone but him had waived this duty, passed it on. Sage had one question to ask the administrator in turn. What is SCB? the singular conceptual bunker being worked on and perfected for thousands of years by now by the Foundation's top scientists and conceptual engineers. The administrator replied, "Victory, but it will take a very, very long time." Specifically, so long that he would see the stars go out around him, one by one. Shocked, Sage asked him what good victory would do him then. Rather than say it aloud, he replied with a thought. Sage paused and said, "I see. How blasphemous of you. Hopefully it works." After this, the administrator proceeded to the singular conceptual bunker and entered it, leaving instructions for the Foundation to be run by a newly formed O5 Council in his indefinite absence. Thousands of years later, in the year 5011, Sage spoke one more time, repeating the words, "Hopefully, hopefully," before turning solid black and disappearing. The Black Moon had claimed one more victim, but billions more had gone in the interim. The administrator had no more answers to give. At least, no more answers that anyone but him would understand. He was inside the singular conceptual bunker now, loaded into a device known as Tome, an experimental memorial module meant to pick up and record all the last messages of every dying civilization across the universe. When the time finally came, all he could do was wait, and wait was exactly what we did. Does the Black Moon howl? Yes, yes it does. Years pass, too many to count. It's a time after names now, and Tome sits in the very center drinking in the end of the universe. The last of all the human colonies across the universe were obliterated by the Black Moon back in the year 7329. So long ago. But some of the final messages of fear, panic, and distress still echoed around in the administrator's mind.
Hello? Is there anyone here? We require assistance. It's taking people every day. We need help. There's barely anyone left. We need help. Hello? Hello? Cabal 0943, we have abandoned the false flesh. We have abandoned the false flesh. The shepherd's crook broken neath my knee. Cabal 0943, Cabal 0943, forgive us! Forgive us!
We're going to leave this on. It's so dark outside now. It's blotted out the sun. I have to go now.
Respond. First convenience. Emergency. Situation developing. Require additional resources.
My fault, your fault, our fault, my fault, your fault, our fault, my fault, your fault, our fault! Rip my brain out now, rip my brain out now!
And a small child, the last on Earth, simply asking, "Hello?" into an indifferent microphone. But the administrator had to wait, as the singular conceptual bunker became the solitary conceptual bunker. He was the last conscious being in the universe, and still he needed to wait as the stars went dark outside. Only when there was nothing outside but black was it finally time for the counterbalance's long game to play off. There was nothing left of our universe. The only thing here was the SCB and the Black Moon itself. With everything else gone, the Black Moon only had one conscious being left to obliterate. It opened the door to the solitary conceptual bunker and stepped inside. This doesn't make sense. How can the Black Moon, an entity beyond our dimension, beyond physical form, take a step? Good question. The same question, incidentally, that was going through the Black Moon's mind as it entered the bunker. It didn't look at all how the entity expected. It was like a bar, a counter, with rows of bottles behind it, a jukebox playing in the corner. A man stood behind the bar cleaning the glasses. The counterbalance. The administrator. He said, "Well, there you are. Certainly took your time. Can I pour you a little something?" This only served to increase the Black Moon's confusion. It had form here, dark smoke compressed into a vaguely humanoid shape. It could speak. It could think. None of this made any sense. The being that had just wiped out all conscious life and seen the very death of the universe was truly and utterly confused. The administrator just seemed to be enjoying himself, preparing for a confrontation hundreds of billions of years in the making. The singular conceptual bunker, or perhaps the singular containment bunker, was a truly ingenious creation. A place of pure ideas, where everything inside was on the same level. Here there were no immortals, No gods, just ideas on the same level playing field. And it was time for the Black Moon's idea to come to an end. It was a trap, and the entire universe was the bait. Without warning, the administrator pulled up a shotgun from underneath the table and unleashed both barrels into the Black Moon's chest. The creature took the hit and fought back, dragging the administrator to the ground, beating him, strangling him. He could feel the light fading under the monster's relentless assault, until he managed to get his desperate hands on a glass ashtray. He beat the monster over the head with it until its grip loosened, and he was able to slide out. There, the killer of the universe was on the ground before him. He grabbed the monster, held it in place, and beat it to death. He was gravely injured by the battle, but the Black Moon was no more. Here in the singular conceptual bunker, he had won. The administrator, no longer the counterbalance in the absence of the Black Moon, hobbled over to the jukebox, produced a single beautiful coin from his pocket. He pushed the coin into the slot, wheezed a pained breath, and said, "The thing is, this place is only information. There's nothing else out there. Not even matter. The universe closed its doors a long time ago. But this place can go from information back to matter with just the press of a button." Let's see what happens when we introduce something to nothing. For a second it looks as though he might fall, but he doesn't. Instead, he slams the button on the jukebox, and with a relieved laugh says, "Let there be light." And there was light. We have always been afraid of the dark. Ancient ancestors of mankind built fires to chase the shadows away, to keep the thick, black mystery of night from encroaching on their fragile little homes, with all of the teeth and claws it hid within its depths. From the time we were small children, we knew to be nervous when the lights went out. We beg our parents to leave the hall light on, or plug in a nightlight, praying that a tiny sliver of illumination will protect us from the monsters we just know are salivating beneath the bed, scratching against the closet door, waiting for us to close our eyes. We pull the blankets tight over our heads, heating the air with our panicked breaths, and reminding ourselves that the shadow in the corner of the room was just a rocking chair or a coat rack. We pretend it's the truth. But there's a reason we fear the darkness as much as we do. It's inherent. It's a memory passed down from generation to generation, ever since we first learned how to scream. As adults, we try to tell ourselves we've outgrown those childish fears and night terrors. We know better now, but you still run up the darkened staircase as if something's chasing you, and your heart jumps into your throat when you hear a sound after midnight. Call it El Cucuy, the Clud, the Boogeyman, or 1,000 other names. We all know there is something lurking in the dark, and it knows us too. D-Class 080-1 was pulled from his cell one afternoon and brought to a containment chamber. He knew the drill by now. They would send him in and he would encounter something bizarre, horrible, and potentially deadly. Maybe he would emerge traumatized. Maybe he would lose a limb. Or maybe he would never come back out at all. A security guard opened the door and instructed him to enter. It wasn't an ideal situation, but he really didn't have much of a choice. And so, he walked inside. Dr. Smith called to him from outside the room, asking him what he could see inside. It was pitch black, and he couldn't see a thing, and he told the doctor as much. But then, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. A chill rippled down his spine. He had the distinct feeling that something was looking right at him, watching, waiting.
Did you just let something in here?
He asked.
It feels like something's watching me.
No, D080-1, Dr. Smith responded. We did not let anything into the room. The man's hands were shaking, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead. That couldn't be true. He wasn't alone in there. There, in the corner, there was a black mass, large and somehow even darker than the rest of the room. He could feel its eyes on his, boring into him. His heart thudded in his chest, and he felt like he might be sick. He tried to take a step back, but his ankle folded under him and he collapsed onto the floor. What do you see? Dr. Smith asked. The man struggled to find the words.
The giant blackness, like someone's just standing in the corner. Oh God, it's looking right at me. Let me out! He climbed to his feet and he felt his way along the wall until he reached the door and began to pound against it with his fists. The doctor refused to let him out until he described the being's appearance. It looks like a figure hunched in the corner. Is it human? Dr. Smith asked. Though he knew it was too dark for the doctor to see, he shook his head. No, it's too big to be a human. It's still looking at me, Doc, still staring. Though he should have had adrenaline pumping through his body, he felt suddenly sleepy, almost unable to keep his eyes open. Move closer to it, Dr. Smith ordered. The D-class obeyed, though he swayed on his feet as he walked. Its eyes look like vapor, just staring at me. It wants me to do something. At this point, he fell to the ground again, suddenly silent. Dr. Smith called out to him again and again, but the man did not respond. When the research team opened the containment chamber several minutes later, D080-1 was gone. He was lost to the thing that waits for us in the dark. He was lost to SCP-080. This was the first in a series of tests that a Foundation research team, headed by Dr. Smith, performed in order to better understand this shadowy figure and determine whether or not it has a physical body of any kind. When the results were determined to be unsatisfactory, another experiment was conducted. A woman referred to as D080-2 was selected and sent into the room. This time they would attempt to have the D-class touch the entity. Upon entering the chamber, D080-2 remarked on how dark it was and how difficult it was to see anything inside. After several minutes, however, she noticed something standing in the room. When prompted, the only descriptor she could give was that the entity had 2 eyes. Dr. Smith asked her to approach the entity and report any changes. As she got closer, she became increasingly drowsy and exhausted. When she reached out to touch SCP-080, she went quiet and did not respond to any additional questions. She was found asleep in the corner of the containment room and was immediately examined by medical staff. No adverse physical effects were found, and an interview was conducted to determine if there was any residual psychological impact. In her interview, D080-2 was noticeably distant. Her expression and tone of voice both described as spaced out. When asked about her encounter with the entity, she became increasingly upset and began to hyperventilate. She screamed, "It just stared and stared, not moving, but I felt something. I was on the floor and they were all over me. They're here. No, they're trying to take me away, back to that thing. I won't go back. You can't make me go back in there." At this point, she lunged across the table and attempted to attack Dr. Smith. She was removed from the interview room and later terminated. A third experiment was conducted using a man referred to as D080-3. In order to counteract the entity's tranquilizing effects, he was given a powerful amphetamine at a dose that would keep a person under ordinary circumstances awake for at least 36 hours. When he entered the room like all the others, D080-3 saw a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the room. He was told to stand still and watch the figure, and report anything unusual that he might notice. After 10 minutes, the subject became frightened and demanded to be let out of the room. He pounded on the door and attempted to wedge it open. When he failed to open the door, he lunged at SCP-080 and attempted to hit it with his fists. He promptly slumped on the floor and went silent. His dead body was found in the room after the experiment, and an autopsy determined the cause of death to be a severe heart attack. The researchers who entered to retrieve the body felt unsettled as they did so, reporting a feeling that SCP-080 was looking directly at them the entire time. Following the conclusion of these experiments, the research team was able to draw several conclusions about SCP-080. It causes debilitating drowsiness in anyone who enters its containment chamber. After 30 minutes of exposure, anyone who is observing the entity will involuntarily fall into REM sleep. If there is any light in the room brighter than a standard children's nightlight, the entity will disappear. This should be treated as a containment breach if and when this occurs. After conducting their experiments, Dr. Smith and his research team began to experience highly upsetting dreams. While many of the staff began requesting appointments with the medical team, Dr. Smith refused to discuss the nature of his dreams with any on-site psychologists, insisting that he wasn't going to let some silly nightmares get the better of him. As the weeks wore on, however, he became increasingly withdrawn. His colleagues noted dark circles under his eyes and noticed his near-constant consumption of coffee that far surpassed anything they had seen from him before. He seemed as if he was terrified of falling asleep. One day, the exhaustion caught up to him, and he fell asleep at his desk. Everyone in the building heard his screams, and when a security guard eventually shook him awake, his throat was so raw from crying out in terror that he was coughing up globs of blood. Dr. Smith begged to be given an amnestic to help him forget what he had dreamed about, forget all his dreams, but his request was denied. He was placed on an indefinite leave of absence and sent home. 2 days later, the research team was given a somber report. Dr. Smith had leapt off a bridge. Following Dr. Smith's tragic demise, the rest of his staff were given notebooks and encouraged to keep dream journals during the course of their research in order to track the psychological impact of studying SCP-080. Additionally, they were required to turn these journals in to site psychologists for review, particularly if the dreams became especially disturbing or violent. The following are excerpts from some of these dream journals. Research Assistant Megan Vaughn. Last night I dreamt I was lying in my bed. Not my bed now in my apartment, but my childhood bed with the baby pink sheets and the quilt my grandmother made. It felt so real, every detail. My dollhouse in the corner, my big teddy bear, my tea set, and my closet. I was lying on my side with my head facing my closet. I used to be so scared of that closet. Every night I would sob until my dad checked it for monsters. I couldn't go to sleep until he did, but in my dream I knew he hadn't checked, and I just knew there was something in there waiting for me to close my eyes, so I didn't. I just stared at that closet door and I waited for it to open. I started hearing this scraping noise, like dragging something sharp across a wooden surface, over and over and over again. But the door didn't budge, no matter how long I stared at it. All the while the noise just kept going. Scrape, scrape, and the sound of soft, raspy breathing, but the closet stayed shut. Eventually I rolled onto my back and there it was, on my ceiling, hanging over me with its upside-down head and round, open mouth. An old woman with long, stringy hair and fingernails as long as my arms. She was scratching on the ceiling and waiting for me to look. I couldn't move. I could just stare up at her as she took 2 of those long, long fingernails and slowly inched them towards my eyes. And then I woke up. I'm scared if I go back to sleep, she'll pick up right where she left off. Dr. Owen Coley. I'm swimming in my family's pond and it's a beautiful sunny day outside. I can feel the sun's heat on my skin and the crisp cold water cooling it every time I dip under the surface. I decide to swim down towards the bottom and dive for rocks, and when I come back up, suddenly it's dark. It's the middle of the night and the water doesn't look so clear anymore. I can't see the bottom. I can't see anything around me at all, and I feel something slither against my leg. I kick it away, but I just feel something else on my other side, slimy and quick. I can't see it, but I can feel that it's much bigger than me. So I start swimming towards the edge, trying to get out before something worse happens. And I feel this sharp pain, like 100 needles stabbing into my back. And it hurts so bad I see red, but I keep swimming. I reach the edge and I try to pull myself out, but I can't. There's something on me. It's so heavy I can't get out. I look over my shoulder and I can now make it out. It's the biggest leech I've ever seen, and it's latched onto me. I can see it pulsing, swallowing. It's draining me. And I feel so weak all of a sudden, dizzy, and I look down at my hands and they're shriveling up right there, my fingers pruning as I feel the blood being pulled out of me. My vision blurs up and my head tips back and I'm sinking down into the water as the leech keeps sucking. Pulls down into the muck at the bottom and everything just goes dark. Researcher Kathy Levine. Okay, in my dream I was in my old house back when I lived out in the woods. No cell reception and no neighbors. I was in the shower washing my hair, I think. It's so hard to remember the details. I don't remember the details of dreams very well, but I'll do my best. This part I do remember. I heard this sound like footsteps coming from the floor above me. That quiet thudding sound coming down through the ceiling. I turned off the water to listen better, and there it was again. Definitely footsteps. Someone was in my house. I threw on my clothes and I slowly snuck out of the bathroom and I made my way to the front door. I don't know why, I just knew I needed to get out of there. Just when I opened it, I heard the footsteps behind me and I turned around and there was this man there. Huge, like 7 feet tall, massive tangled beard, wild eyes, and holding an axe. We stared at each other for a long time and he just smiled, like he was so sure he was going to kill me and have a lovely time doing it. I ran out of the house and into the woods and I could hear him coming after me. Branches hit me in the face and cut up my arms as I ran and I just knew I had to get away. But then I started to get that feeling you get when you run in dreams, like your legs don't work, like you're pushing through water. I was running as fast as I could, but I wasn't going forward at all. And then I felt a hand grabbing my hair, yanking my head back and the blade of the axe slicing across my cheek. He whispered in my ear and his breath smelled like rotting flesh. And I'll never forget this next part. He said,
"We're not done playing yet. I'm gonna take you apart in tiny pieces and save your head for last."
Dr. Robert Gray. I was sitting on the couch next to my wife. We were watching television. I turned to ask her a question and she was staring at me with these dilated pupils so big her eyes looked all black. And then she opened her mouth to speak to me, I thought. But it got wider and had no teeth, just this expanding tunnel of pink flesh that started to suck me inside until my head disappeared into her mouth and I began to suffocate. I haven't been able to look my wife in the eye all day today. Other dream journals were less detailed. Research assistant Matt Guerro simply wrote, "My dog ate me," while senior researcher Barbara Bradley wrote, "I was stuck inside my fish tank, and my fish were feeding me human flakes." No matter how frightening or absurd the dream details were, all the staff reported experiencing feelings of intense stress and panic while having them, and after waking up. SCP-080 is contained in a 4-meter by 4-meter room with a small antechamber on the south wall, providing researchers with access to the space. On the other side of the north wall, there is an observation room where researchers can view the containment room through a window. The window is outfitted with thin blackout curtains, which release when the observation room door has fully closed. No one may attempt to remove SCP-080 from its containment at any time under any circumstances. No light sources may be brought into the room, and no more than one 7-watt incandescent light bulb may be lit inside. Additionally, no objects may be brought into the room that can be used to hide SCP-080 in any way. Anyone who breaks these rules will be swiftly and strictly disciplined and may be subject to termination. Following Incident 080-1, the containment measures have been re-evaluated, and additional measures have been proposed. During this incident, 2 senior researchers entered the observation room and released the blackout curtains. Certain that this was a safe way to observe SCP-080 without being influenced by its adverse effects, the 2 remained in the room for 40 minutes. At this point, the 2 fell asleep. It is unknown what exactly happened after this. However, after this incident, all staff suffering from anomalous nightmares reported having their first restful night's sleep since the research had begun. It was as if the entity's appetite had been temporarily sated, and it had released the rest of the team from its influence. In light of Incident 080-1, a member of the research team suggested that a D-Class be left in SCP-080's room once a month in order to feed it, and protect the rest of the team from psychological harm. After some debate and opposition from the Ethics Committee, this proposal was approved by the O5 Council. Now the entity is kept on a regular feeding schedule, and the staff's dream journals have been relatively uneventful ever since. It turns out that sometimes the price for a good night's sleep is just a little bit of human sacrifice.
You're a researcher working at Site 19 for the SCP Foundation, just going about your day, minding your own business. You've spent your morning keeping an eye on the D-Classes who are keeping their eyes on SCP-173. The clock strikes noon, and you decide to break for lunch, where you'll enjoy the delicious tuna sandwich you made for yourself this morning. You're sitting alone in one of Site 19's numerous employee break rooms, chewing the first bite of your sandwich as you try in vain to wrap your head around SCP-055, the unknowable anti-meme when a scent wafts past your nose. It's the worst thing you've ever smelled. like a mix of body odor, dirt, and musty old clothes. You turn to look for the source of the smell, and suddenly realize that you're not alone in the room. There's a man standing next to you. He's tall, with a scruffy face lined by age. He's wearing a long woolen coat that dangles past his knees. He doesn't say a word though. He's just staring, but not at you, at your sandwich. Before you can open your tuna-filled mouth to say something, his greatcoat opens, and a long green tentacle slithers out, grabbing your sandwich and pulling it out of your hands. You start to protest, and then another limb emerges from the coat, long and reptilian. It places a single finger upon your lips and shushes you. The tentacle lifts your delicious tuna sandwich up to the strange man's face, and he starts to eat it in front of you, maintaining eye contact the entire time. Then, after he finishes your lunch, he just turns and makes his exit, leaving you alone in the break room, and hungry. Later that day, you request a meeting with your supervisor, hoping to get some answers about what you saw in the break room. Maybe some compensation for the stolen sandwich, or at the very least, a little sympathy for how hungry you've been all afternoon. But your supervisor does none of that. Instead, the color drains from their cheeks and they begin to sweat. You ask what's wrong, and your supervisor murmurs one brief sentence. "You just met the most powerful person in the world." Of course you've heard of the O5 Council. They're the most powerful people in the entire SCP Foundation, both in terms of institutional control and perhaps even literal raw power. Depending on who you ask, they might be a group of elite Foundation agents and researchers who rose to the very top of the pyramid, a secret room full of dusty, old, power-hungry bureaucrats, or a cabal of superpowered beings that transcend the bounds of our dimension. In short, almost nobody is more powerful than the Foundation's O5 Council. But who oversees the overseers, if anyone at all? If they do exist, then who's the one figure in Foundation lore more secret than the most secretive group imaginable? There's only one answer to this question. A figure known only as the Administrator. If you spend some time researching the affairs of the SCP Foundation, there's no doubt you would have heard the name. Perhaps in a heavily redacted file, or whispered in fear by a site director worrying about incurring the mysterious figure's wrath. Today we intend to do the impossible, and we just might end up terminated by the Red Right Hand because of it. But we're going to gather all the information available to us, and try to figure out who or what the clandestine administrator actually is. We'll answer your most obvious question first. What's with those weird sandwich-stealing arms? One of the few almost universally accepted facts about the administrator is their possession of SCP-262, also known as the Coat of Many Arms. Little to nothing is known about the coat's history before it came into the administrator's possession, and given the huge amount of power the administrator wields within the Foundation, nobody has the authority to press them for further information. The coat's interior is a spatial anomaly, from which a huge number of anomalous limbs can emerge and perform tasks on the wearer's behalf. It's such a useful item that the Foundation has even considered weaponizing it for field agents, as the arms emerging from the coat are able to perform tasks as diverse as playing the piano with 2 or more hands, to blocking attacks directed towards the wearer that otherwise would have been fatal. The limbs themselves are also varied, from normal-looking human limbs to tentacles and paws. The administrator only finally surrendered the coat to the Foundation in the end because it was taking up too much space in their closet, and presumably needed the room for the next season's most fashionable anomalous clothing. For centuries though, you wouldn't see the administrator without the many-armed coat. That's right, centuries. Another almost universally accepted fact about the administrator is that they have a truly freakish longevity, potentially living for hundreds of years. There has likely been more than one administrator during the Foundation's extremely long history, but each one has survived longer than any average human. It's also a widely believed theory that the administrator may have been a key player in the Foundation's initial creation, too. There's been a number of potential names speculated for the administrator, including Frederick Williams, Agnes Peterson, Kismet, and the sinister alias, the Spider. Some believe the administrator to be fundamentally human despite certain anomalous qualities, while others speculate that they're the furthest thing from human. This interpretation maintains that the administrator is an entity from a different dimension known as the plane where eyes can't follow, and has a freakish body made from a twisted charcoal-like material tangled with wire mesh and a chaos of different limbs, all hidden under SCP-262. But hey, the administrator's species isn't nearly as interesting as their potential role within the Foundation, an issue surrounded with nearly as much confusion and controversy as, well, everything else about them. And just like everything else with the SCP Foundation, the line they feed the public is often different to the words circulating within the Foundation's higher clearance levels. If you want to believe the official stories, then the administrator is the liaison between the Foundation and the numerous world governments that need to cooperate with them to ensure the successful capture of anomalies. The administrator is only allowed to edit SCP files, not actually write them due to apparent conflicts of interest. In many ways, the administrator is presented as your typical sleazy Washington insider, schmoozing with politicians and government figures to make sure they remain sympathetic to the Foundation's cause. According to observations from people outside the Foundation who've worked with the mysterious figure, they have a penchant for finely tailored suits, expensive aged liqueurs, and the amorous company of women. Despite being a bit of a drunken horn dog though, people tend to describe the administrator as likable and easy to get along with regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. They're also respected by many, and whenever something upsets them, even powerful world leaders are eager to try and appease them. Maybe because they are described as being freakishly strong when the situation demands it. Hey, even world leaders can change their minds when they have their arms twisted, literally. While there's nothing too outwardly bizarre about this iteration of the administrator, we don't actually know how much of this is true, a fact that really shouldn't surprise you by now. And if being well-versed in the world of SCPs has taught you anything, it's that the SCP Foundation's PR and disinformation teams are not to be trusted. So who can be trusted? Is there any perspective on this mysterious figure that can be taken reliably? The short answer is no, not really. But we do have the next best thing. Recollections from some of the Foundation's most trusted researchers and personnel, and even some of the strange historical figures that have heard about or even run into the administrator. What follows are some of their answers to the question, who is the administrator? Professor Kane Pathos Crow said, "Oh, he's just something people talk about over lunch or when they're in between assignments. It kills time, and it's a fun game to speculate on who really calls the shots in this crazy world." Field Agent Fritz Willie said, "I like to tell people he's my brother." Foundation researcher Dr. Snorlison said, "I'd like to poke at him and see what happens, just to see if any of the rumors about being made entirely of legs and toes are true, or something like that at least." Director Neil Ghost said, "No big deal, son." The ever-stoic Dr. Charles Gears said, "There are no records of anyone by that name working for the Foundation." Dr. Iceberg said, "Whatever the bossman says goes. I'm not on staff to care about last decade's rumors." Dr. Glass said, "I never met the guy. Heard he's pretty interesting though. I'd love to sit down and have a chat with him, but he's probably too busy. I've never even gotten a call back about it." The wildcard Dr. Alto Clef said, "Who?" Dr. Chelsea Elliott said, "I've actually done some research on him. Earliest records are about 60 years ago, and beyond that there's some vague references to a leader. Most of the records though are incomplete or just references by name, not much of substance." Dr. Frederick Hayden said, "Please leave me alone." Dr. Jack Bright said, "Yeah, I've heard the guy you're talking about. He's just a legendary thing from way back in the day. When we thought there were 1205s, we said he was there to be the tiebreaker. People don't talk about him much now anymore, probably because we don't need icons like that to keep people together." Dr. Jacob Kensington said, "I think he bought me lunch once." Dr. Wright said, "I heard he lives up in a big tower at Overwatch and he watches down on the 05s from the back of a mighty scaled dragon and he flies the skies for free." Or something like that. You'll have to wait until I finish the book to hear the whole story. Dr. Kondraki said, "Well, we can't tell you exactly what he said, but it was short and to the point, and he was later disciplined for his use of rather rude language." In an interview later suppressed by the SCP Foundation, acclaimed horror writer Stephen King said of his interaction with the administrator, "One of the oddest things to happen to me out on the road was an autograph session in Westbrook, I think. A larger gentleman approached the table with a copy of The Stand, said he was a big fan. Now, I think I might have been a little crazy here, but when I looked at his hand holding the book, it was green. I asked if he was okay, and I looked up into his eyes. They were green too. He said he was fine. It was pretty scary stuff. Dr. Tilda D. Moose said, No, I don't even think we humor that one anymore. It's like the mid-tier research staff telling the new people there's a pool on the 3rd floor. Nobody really believes it, but a couple people every year try and ask just to, check. But yes, it's, more or less dead rumor. And Dr. Django Bridge said, Sure, I know him. He hangs out at the pool on the 5th floor. So we return to our original question. Who is the administrator? Do they rule the SCP Foundation or serve it? Are they an anomalous human or a straight-up monster? Are they a liquor-loving political schmoozer greasing the palms of the world's government? Or a mysterious demigod who founded the Foundation and guides it on its quest to contain the anomalous and protect normality? The fact is, we don't know. And thanks to Foundation misinformation campaigns, we may never know. But much like the anti-meme, the administrator's defined as much by what we don't know as what we do. And according to all sources, that's exactly how they like it. But what do you think is the truth about the administrator? Just who exactly is lurking under that coat, if anyone at all?
Agent Kister was running for his life. Every breath had burned in his throat, like inhaling chlorine gas. He sped through the dark, surrounded by deafening metallic screams that bounced off the eternity of pipes scaling and strangling the walls around him. As far as he was concerned, this was what hell looked like. A nightmare boiler room that would somehow be less scary if Freddy Krueger was there, because at least there'd be some kind of recognizably human intelligence to reason with. The pipes, SCP-015, are truly unknowable. As an SCP Foundation Mobile Task Force member, Agent Kister had seen some truly horrific things in the line of duty. He'd been there during SCP-682 containment breaches, firing an assault rifle at the beast as its scales hardened into a bulletproof carapace. He'd seen the femur breaker used on some poor, godforsaken D-class to lure Uncle Larry back into the containment chamber for some midnight fun. In the most anxiety-inducing mission of his life, he'd once even bagged 096's weeping face after it slaughtered a whole mountain village. And these damn pipes were going to be the thing that killed him. He turned a sharp corner, trying to block out the screams of his teammates. 4 of them had been sent in. The rest were already dead, or worse. Stupid, stupid, stupid. They'd made a classic military mistake, underestimating the capabilities of their enemy. And in Agent Kister's experience, this had always been a capital offense. All to install that machine. That stupid little remote control reconnaissance vehicle. That's what they'd given their lives for. Agent Kister tried to blink away the memory of Agent Montgomery's face. Monty was the youngest member of the team, 28 years old, his first major mission into the heart of a skip. Kister wanted to remember him how he'd first seen him, a bright-eyed greenhorn, ready to protect the human race from the horrors that lay in the dark. But he'd been the first to go when everything got FUBAR. It was the smaller pipes that got Monty. 4 of them shot out, spearing his lungs and heart, pinning him in place. Even if they tried to cut him out, he would have been a goner. He coughed up blood and went ghost white faster than you'd ever imagine. Kister would never forget, for what little time he had left to live, the horrible sight of the light leaving that kid's eyes. And all this because one of them had tripped on one of the pipes on the way out and busted it. The mission was already done. What an awful, pointless way to die. Kister was yanked from his aching thoughts by a sudden obstacle in the way. A huge, towering pipe that looked like a pillar of flesh, covered in bulbous, staring eyes. The thought crossed his mind. Jesus, these pipes can really be made out of anything. He looked down and saw a series of rubber pipes slithering towards his feet along the ground like snakes. It was time to run again, but how long could you even run for when the very location around you wants you dead? They should have sent the mole rats for a job like this. The infinitely reconfiguring pipes changed the layout of the warehouse around him, making escape seem all the more unfeasible. That's when he started thinking about the terrible thing that happened to Agent Green. When 015 turned hostile, they needed to make a run for it fast. It wasn't unlike being a pathogen inside a living body.
You start to make trouble, and the body's immune system is going to come for you. And one of the most common mechanisms for a body fighting a virus is a fever, a sudden increase in temperature that burns out the threat. The group turned and ran as the pipes started twisting towards them. Agent Green panicked and began striking at the pipes around him with his hands. The first instinct would have been to shoot, but no guns were permitted inside the SCP-015 warehouse. It reacted severely to any kind of tool being brought into its proximity. Several dead agents and researchers could tell you all about this if they hadn't made that same mistake. But when things were already going sideways, it left them defenseless. Agent Green was soon boxed in, caged by a latticework of pipes in varying sizes. He tried desperately to push them out of the way and make an escape route, but the hissing noise was getting louder and louder as the pipes started to turn a glowing red all around him. After all, when a body needs to deal with a hostile foreign object, it burns out the threat. Kister wished he could shake the awful high-pitched wail that Agent Green made while the heat inside his pipe cage became unbearable. It was like seeing a human get caught inside a giant bug zapper. His skin went black and charred, and soon after, the heat had risen to such an insane degree that Agent Green was reduced to little more than ash in his pipe furnace. But Kister couldn't afford to dwell. He kept running, vaulting over a long, ragged pipe made from stinking human hair. This terrible place stank of motor oil, mold, and death. But maybe those perceptions had been colored by the terrible things he'd seen here. There it was again, that awful choked screaming coming from inside the pipes. Agent Boggs. It was a nightmare to hear him shriek like that. Boggs had been one of the toughest men that Kister had ever met. He mentored him, back when he first became an MTF member. Having Boggs on the team meant experience. It meant safety. It meant that things would go okay. Kister had seen Boggs stare down some of the most horrifying skips imaginable and not even flinch. And yet, here he was, screaming and bawling like a hurt child in the pipes. Boggs was the next one to get taken. As he and Kister ran through the dark, trying to find a way out, they'd passed a huge pipe made of a soft foam-like substance. A seam in the side of the pipe had yawned open, and a tangle of writhing tentacles, each one barbed with thorns like the stem of a rosebush. They enveloped Agent Boggs, cutting into his weathered skin. He gasped in pain, unable to scream. It happened so fast. Before Kister even had a chance to grab him, he was pulled into the pipe, and the crevice sealed behind him. And that was when the screaming really started for poor Agent Boggs. Kister hoped for his sake that he would die sometime soon. Shrouded in the fog of his dark thoughts, Agent Kister turned a corner and felt cold, hard metal suddenly collide with his face, breaking his nose with an unpleasant crunch. He'd been clotheslined by a low pipe that hadn't been there before, and now he was laid out on his back, face humming with pain. Thoughts and feelings swam. He looked up into the seemingly infinite web of pipes weaving through the air above him. He was right earlier. He just knew it. The place was hell. It'd be his eternal resting place. Suddenly, a new, huge shape moved into the space above him. A pipe of ancient, rusty iron that looked older than even the warehouse holding this whole mess. Right above him, there was a huge valve fixed into the pipe's belly. He watched helpless as the valve opened itself with a squeal, and a huge dark mass came pouring out of it onto his body. A sudden weight, a sudden warmth, sound and movement, and tiny scratching claws. Rats. Thousands of big, hungry black rats with gnarled yellow teeth. Clumps of fur purged from their skin by mange. Big, ropey, worm-like tails swaying and whipping at the air. Who knows how long they'd been in that pipe? Who knows when these rats had eaten anything that wasn't their brothers and sisters? And here was Agent Kister, given unto them by the glorious pipes. The last thing he ever saw were those nasty yellow teeth, because they ate his eyes first. Word of the Ford disappeared, and presumed dead operatives soon reached Dr. Charles Ogden Gears, the legendarily taciturn senior researcher that managed the SCP-015 project, among a myriad of others. His face didn't betray a flicker of emotion when he was informed about the men lost to SCP-015. It wasn't that he didn't feel for them, more that he deemed it both unproductive and unprofessional to dwell on the deaths of personnel when carrying out their duties. After all,
Being killed by an anomaly was simply an occupational hazard, and a generous stipend would be sent to their families to compensate for their tragic loss. Dr. Gears simply asked, "Was the mission successful in spite of the casualties? Did the team manage to install the modular robotic vehicle at the epicenter?" He was told that the MRV had been successfully installed at least. Dr. Gears nodded and began scheduling a second exploratory mission for a few months in the future to check the status of the machine. Still, in the meantime, the MRV would chug along, doing what humans couldn't, or perhaps shouldn't, do within the nightmarish mess of ever-growing pipes. It would roll through, collecting information on everything around it, hopefully giving the SCP Foundation an inroad to mapping the whole thing, without needing to send a cavalcade of staff into the danger zone, just to discover more about these peculiar pipes. Sure, some lives were lost getting in there, but this measure would likely save even more lives in the long run. That was until something went wrong. The exact nature of what happened to the MRV inside the domain of pipes was a mystery, but it wasn't doing its intended job, and the SCP Foundation needed to find out why. The second exploratory mission was required much sooner than they'd initially anticipated, with a dual purpose: collecting the readings and finding out what exactly had happened to the MRV in the first place. He included a more specific set of instructions for the next mission. Only 3 members of personnel to enter SCP-015 this time, to minimize potential loss. 1 trained technician to collect and read the diagnostics, and 2 guards to maintain discipline and safety under pressure. With a setup like that, what could possibly go wrong? Dr. Gears' various assistants began headhunting the perfect team for the job. Junior researcher Lon, wanting to prove herself and climb up the ranks, put her name forward. She was young, intelligent, and had the initiative to get the job done. Though there was one thing that she hadn't disclosed when she was applying for this important new position. Junior researcher Lon suffered from claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. Then the hunt was on for the 2 members of Foundation military personnel who'd escort Lon to the MRV to take the readings. Like the 2 priests in The Exorcist, they decided to recruit 1 grizzled, experienced operative and 1 extremely cautious young buck straight out of the Foundation MTF Training Academy. The younger of the 2 operatives, codenamed Agent 2, was careful and conscientious to a fault. He did things by the book, or not at all. The older operative, codenamed Agent 6, was quite the opposite. He'd done this job long enough to operate solely on instinct, and resented his employers for expecting him to approach his missions any other way. Lon, Agent 2, and Agent 6. The team was assembled, and when the time came, they were taken to SCP-015 to execute their mission. It should have been simple enough. Get in, collect the readings, and get back out. Though a few weeks earlier, the same thing would have been said for the mission to install the MRV, which left for Mobile Task Force operatives dead or worse. Nothing was ever as simple as it seemed when it came to SCP-015. They were only allowed flashlights inside. Anything else carried a substantial risk of activating SCP-015's defensive state, putting all of their lives in jeopardy. Lon had tried to keep things light, masking her own terrible fear at this strange new situation. She joked that perhaps the 3 of them should get Mario hats, seeing as they were plumbers now. Agent 2 happily laughed along, suggesting that perhaps he should be Luigi. Agent 6 was utterly unamused by this whole situation and wanted no part of it, which is honestly just so Wario of him. They followed along a carefully mapped route through the pipes, being careful not to touch any of them. After all, you never know what could set SCP-015 off. Agent 6 didn't share in their merriment or their concern. In fact, he had contempt for them and this whole situation. He thought Lon and Agent 2 were a pair of frightened, skittish children, willing to buy whatever Foundation-assigned bull honky they were given. He didn't believe that SCP-015 was anywhere near as dangerous as they'd been told. In all likelihood, knowing the eggheads up top, they just didn't want men of action like him breaking any of their precious little toys while conducting missions on their behalf. This whole thing was a big, stupid joke. As they ducked and weaved through the confines of SCP-015, the tensions between them all just silently grew. Their flashlights played among the pipes, revealing the insane variety of shapes, sizes, compositions, and materials in here. Wood, steel, flesh, bone, glass, pressed ash, granite, and so much more. And yet, there were no pipes comprised of any standard pipe-making material, like lead, PVC plastic, or copper. It was undeniably freaky, but when you work with SCPs for long enough, you learn to stop asking questions about the more minor forms of strangeness inherent to anomalies. The composition only got narrower as they delved deeper into the warehouse. Lon felt the anxiety, like a hand gripping her throat and squeezing, but tried still to keep it hidden. Agent 6, the largest among them, almost got stuck a few times, trying to crawl into spaces too tight for him to fit. He felt like murdering Lon when she threw out a casual comparison to Winnie the Pooh in the process. When they reached the MRV, it gave them an ounce of momentary relief. The journey was halfway done. But the comfort was quickly squashed by seeing what had actually happened to the MRV. It had been speared by a pipe, and new pipes had grown through and out of it, effectively rooting it in place. This caused immediate debate among the group around one key issue. Did this mean that the MRV was now technically part of the pipes? And by extension, would the pipes feel the need to defend themselves if the databanks were removed from the MRV in order to deliver the readings back to the researchers at Site-17? While Lon and Agent 2 carefully discussed the issue, Agent 6 lost his temper and decided to show these two foolish kids how it was done. He claimed the two of them were worrying about a bunch of Foundation hooey that they were inexperienced and gullible enough to believe, as if this bunch of weird pipes was actually dangerous. It was like how every 6 anomalies there's apparently one capable of ending the world. It's all a bunch of overblown, fear-mongering nonsense. And to prove that he wasn't just all talk on this front, Agent 6 pried open the top of the MRV and slid out the data cards, which seemed to be covered in some kind of viscous, unpleasant liquid from the pipes that had penetrated the device. Still, he'd gotten what they came for. He could have done this whole thing alone without this pair of bedwetters. He scoffed and said,
"Kids, I don't know how you two survive."
But he shouldn't have spoken so soon. The large pipe that he didn't even realize he was standing on opened up beneath his feet, and seconds later he was immersed up to his shoulders in it. 6 began to let out the most horrifying shrieks you've ever heard, and when Agent 2 and Lon ran over to try and help him out, they realized why. The pipe below Agent 6 was filled with flowing molten iron. By the time they pulled Agent 6 out, well, Agent 6 from the shoulders up, considering that that was all that was left, he was already dead. And despite the actual aggressor being destroyed, SCP-015 wasn't done. It was ready to clean house. As Agent 2 and Lon attempted to flee, some eye-level pipes around them burst, firing crystallized glass into their faces, cutting into their skin and eyes. But they needed to push on, despite the pain if they wanted to survive and get out. The two of them ran, horrifying noises of twisting and bursting pipes roaring behind them. Pipes made of thorns and bones started to grow, blocking off their exits until they were trapped. Lon, utilizing her small frame, was able to crawl through a gap in the pipes into an adjoining chamber. 2 was given a horrifying surprise when a pipe burst near his hand, showering his flesh in thick, corrosive gunk. His hand melted away at the wrist. As Lon called for help in the tiny cramped chamber she was locked in, 2 ran off to try and find an exit where he could bring more people in to help them. But it would already be too late for poor Lon. A thick, honey-like substance began bleeding into the chamber, disgusting in its overpowering saccharine flavor and goopy, viscous thickness. The chamber seemed to get smaller and smaller as Lon screamed as the honey level rose. Eventually, it got higher than her mouth and nose could reach. She gave a horrifying final gurgle, and then she was gone, entombed forever between the pipes. Agent 2 kept running. His flashlight was beginning to die, but he didn't care. As his eyes bled from the splinters of glass and what was left of his hand dripped from the jagged nub of his wrist, all he could do was keep moving forwards. He panted and screamed and stumbled in the dark until he tripped on something he didn't notice and pitched forwards. He tumbled into the gaping maw of a nearby pipe, surrounded by unseeable, unknowable ooze. As he tumbled further down into the seemingly infinite darkness,
It was too dark to see and too cramped to move anywhere but straight down. All he could do was scream and scream and scream, until his voice was hoarse and his throat bled, though nobody was there to even hear his cries. Days later, when his skin started to shred off, it was almost welcome. Dr. Gears would later receive the news of this tragically failed mission, and the 3 operatives now declared MIA because of it. He sighed and wrote up his report on the matter, closing with the sentence, "Data deemed non-vital in light of lost staff. SCP-015 classification level review suggested."
It's 3 a.m. and the facility is quiet. Office workers and administrators roam the halls. Security officers stand at their posts, clad in advanced tactical armor and carrying standard-issue M4 carbines. 3 Foundation employees sit at flickering monitors watching a live feed of footage from the containment cell of the infamous SCP-106, or as it's referred to by all staff, the Old Man. No Foundation personnel are permitted to travel within 60 feet of the cell for security reasons, and nobody is permitted to physically interact with the anomaly without the approval of 2/3 of O5 Command. The observer's eyes itch and sting from hours of unending blue light exposure, but they can't look away. The Old Man is crafty. He might have the insatiable bloodlust of a hungry great white shark, but he's not mindless. He's a calculating predator, more sadistic than the worst human serial killer, and he's always searching for the next opportunity. According to the Foundation records, he's been active since at least World War II, and it's estimated that he has hundreds if not thousands of victims to his name, and many of those made simple but extremely foolish mistakes of underestimating him. After all, it only takes a few seconds of inattentiveness and the briefest moment of distraction to give him the window he needs. To do what, you ask? Oh, don't worry, you'll find out, just like they did. The Old Man has his nickname for a reason. Most of the time, he really does look exactly like that, an old man, or more specifically an old man's decaying corpse, his body covered in rotten, dark, grayish-black flesh that looks like putrid meat. Though the creature has been observed being able to change shape, the rot seems to run too deep for the Old Man to ever hide it. Foundation employees that have observed SCP-106 for extended periods of time have reported seeing it assume the form of grinning, decayed children and women whose rotted flesh barely hangs on their creaking bones. Just seeing the images through a video feed is enough to cause a lifetime of insomnia and other sleeping issues. Still, they have a job to do and the cameras remain fixed on the Old Man. He's been completely motionless for 3 months, just sitting there like a Buddhist monk in deep meditation. A novice might see this period of inactivity as a cause for celebration, but those with experience know that this is merely the calm before the storm. SCP-106 can remain in a dormant state for months at a time. Described by the Foundation scientists as a lulling state, it's believed that the Old Man is simply waiting for its captors to get soft, make a mistake, or simply have a momentary lapse in concentration, which is all it needs to make its move. It had happened so many times before, and it was about to happen again. One of the observers must have felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety as he saw the creature ever so slightly twitch. Just a tiny quiver in the shoulder muscles, but that was enough to tell the observer that their day had just taken a terrifying turn. He grabbed the emergency phone fixed to his desk and practically screamed into the receiver that 106 is moving, that they need a tactical team stat. But it was already too late. He and the other 2 observers stared into the monitors with their mouths agape as a gooey, rust-like substance began to pool around the creature on the floor of its cell. Slowly, the creature craned its withered neck around. Its face was fixed into a broad, yellow-toothed, lipless grin. Its eyes had the kind of dull, flat malice of an underwater predator. It looked directly into the camera, directly at them, and smiled. The observers knew this was bad. Really, really bad. With what they could have sworn was a little nod, the Old Man began sinking into the rusty puddle it made on the ground beneath it, until it had disappeared entirely. SCP-106 is capable of phasing through any solid surface with ease, making it one of the hardest entities to reliably contain, and earning it a spot on the dreaded Keter class, reserved for the anomalies that are complete nightmares to keep locked up. Through the years of costly research and deadly trial and error, the Foundation would later devise ways of at least slowing the creature down. It's shown to have an aversion to lead, highly complex or random physical structures, and intense bright light. None of these cause harm to the creature, as far as we know, literally nothing can, but they'll at least buy you some precious extra seconds with which to at least try and escape. Seconds the 3 observers didn't have. One of them grabbed an emergency line again and barked into it that they had lost visual on the anomaly. Just then, the observers heard a faint, crackling sound behind them and the hissing of a chemical burn. They turned in horror to see a huge rusty burn mark expanding across the wall, right next to the door, which was their only escape route. They backed as far away from the door as they could as a rotten hand began reaching out of the mass of corrosive black sludge, followed by the grinning face of SCP-106, ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, two heavily armed security officers, Agents Goodwin and Resnick, came charging down the corridor toward the observation rooms. It became a bleak slogan during SCP-106 escape attempts that all you need to do is follow the screams, and that motto was proven true that night, because awful things were happening to the observation personnel. They were certainly screaming about it. Of course, even with the top-of-the-line firearms, there was little they could do to harm the rampaging old man. He seemed immune to all forms of physical damage. All they could hope to do was keep the thing distracted until the scientists and containment specialists finished the preparations to lure him back into his containment cell. Goodwin surged forward while Resnick covered his six. Vigilance was key, as unlike a standard human combatant, SCP-106 could attack from literally any angle, including above or below. Physical obstacles were irrelevant to him, and no cover was safe. The hardened security officers could see the burn mark on the wall of the observation room as they approached. SCP-106 was perpetually coated in a thick black mucus with powerful corrosive properties that left any surfaces it touched permanently marred. Foundation scientists speculated that this mucus served as a kind of pre-digestive substance that tenderizes meat and bone alike, but to what purpose this serves is a mystery, as the old man has never been observed eating. It's postulated that the only purpose is causing additional pain. Goodwin and Resnick knew to treat this hissing sludge as a potential threat, as the corrosive properties would remain active for as much as 6 hours before finally fizzling out. The two officers shared a quiet nod before Goodwin breached the observation room door with a hard kick. The two of them surged inside, guns at the ready. In their time working at the Foundation, they'd seen some truly horrific sights. From the mutilation of D-Class personnel, typically death row prison inmates brought in for use as SCP guinea pigs, to the violence and mayhem of a containment breach. But there was nothing in their past that would ever make the horrifying sight they saw in the observation room that night feel normal. All three observers were dead. Almost nothing remained of two of them, and the third, while still intact, no longer looked human. He looked like he'd somehow been dead 100 years in the brief period that the old man had been free. His skin was gray and completely dried out, and his mouth was locked into a perpetual scream. It was a massacre, but there was no sign of the old man. Goodwin grabbed his radio and whispered, "This is Goodwin in Observation Room 6, requesting immediate backup. We have no idea where this thing," but his sentence was cut off by a sudden scream from Agent Resnick. SCP Foundation security officers are as tough as nails, the best of the best, you might say, recruited from the top military organizations in the world. So hearing one of them scream in fright is a rare, if not impossible, occurrence. But even they were forced to yell out in fear when they looked up to see the old man standing on the ceiling, grinning down at them. Resnick raised his M4 and shot a 3-round burst at center mass. SCP-106 didn't care. Even under sustained gunfire from the two security officers, it didn't flinch. The old man simply reached down and snatched Agent Resnick from the ground like it was picking an apple from a tree. The old man held Resnick in one hand and pounded its other rotten fist into the agent's body, breaking all of his bones. Resnick screamed for his partner to help him, but there was no time. Before Goodwin could do anything, SCP-106 began receding back into another slimy burn mark on the wall. Only this time, he was taking his screaming victim with him. Agent Resnick gave one more horrified scream before he was pulled backward into the inky darkness, leaving the room silent except for the burning hiss of the corrosive goo left behind. You might think this would be the end of it, but no. For poor Agent Resnick, the worst was yet to come. He was being dragged into what the SCP Foundation scientists refer to as the Old Man's Pocket Dimension, a miniature layer of reality within our own where the malicious SCP is essentially a cruel, all-powerful god. According to witness reports extracted from victims who were taken to this little nightmare realm, the dimension resembles a series of twisting, endless corridors where the old man stalks and tortures his captured victims to the breaking point, manipulating space and time to his own sadistic ends. On rare occasions, the SCP will even release its victims just for the joy of hunting, capturing, and torturing them all over again. While Agent Resnick was learning the true meaning of terror, containment specialists were mobilizing in its cell, preparing the one known tried and true method of luring the old man back. tempting it with the prospect of causing even more suffering. In order to do this, Foundation personnel take one of the aforementioned Class D personnel and begin inducing extreme pain by breaking a major bone or slicing a tendon every 20 minutes. The victim's agonizing screams are then played over the facility's intercom, acting as bait for the pain-loving old man. The screams echo through the facility's otherwise silent halls as the mutilated corpse of Agent Resnick falls from a new scorch mark on the ceiling. The old man can hear the sounds of suffering ringing out through the air around him, and he can barely contain his excitement over the prospect of a new plaything. The snapped femurs, the torn Achilles tendons, it was all too good to miss. Having had its twisted fun with the security officers and observers, SCP-106 wandered back to its containment cell, where a new screaming victim awaited. The other security officers, containment specialists, and scientists evacuated the area, leaving the old man alone with his prey. While the unfortunate Class D was left to his fate, the rest of the staff commenced cleanup procedures, which mainly involve wiping the brown and black mucus from the walls. It would probably be at least another month before anything like this happened again, and new personnel would be transferred over to the facility to replace the fallen. All in all, just another night at the SCP Foundation.
Working at the SCP Foundation can really get your appetite going. After spending a rough shift monitoring the acid levels in SCP-682's tank, or performing the rituals necessary to keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, sometimes you just need a quick snack to hold you over before you return to the old grind. Problem is, at the SCP Foundation, even the break room can be perilous. Dr. Dan is notorious for pilfering pudding cups from the communal fridge, and ever since the administrator himself stole your tuna sandwich, you just don't feel safe spending your lunch break on site anymore. But this presents its own series of issues. You only have an hour for lunch, and obviously you can't order in due to security issues. Also, if you're eating off-site, you have even less time to finish your lunch because the site you're currently stationed at is relatively remote. We're talking at least a half-hour round trip to actually get to somewhere, so you're gonna need your food fast. And when it comes to fast food, few eateries are as prolific as the Golden Arches, McDonald's. And just to clarify, this video is not sponsored. We're gonna tell you about a horrifying anomalous secret that this company really doesn't want you to know about. Let's not think about that just yet though. Your stomach is rumbling, and you need that quarter pounder so bad that even being trapped in the red reality with Dr. Scranton couldn't stop you from getting it. When you finally arrive, you buy your typical order. A quarter pounder with french fries, a coffee, and a McFlurry. You see Dr. Clef a few tables down enjoying a box of chicken nuggets and ketchup, but decide not to engage. As you sit and enjoy your meager little lunch, knowing you'll probably be coordinating the cleaning efforts of SCP-173's containment chamber by the end of the day, your eyes drift over to something even more unsettling. Happy, the current mascot for McDonald's Happy Meals. You can't help but shudder. You've seen some pretty horrific things on the job. Nightmarish things. You fear no monster, but that thing, it scares you. Those big, soulless eyes, the wide, gaping maw full of two white teeth. Its diabolical sneakers. No child should ever have to look at that. You can't help but wonder, whatever happened to Ronald McDonald, the hamburger-happy clown that shilled fast food to you throughout your childhood? What is he up to now? Well, we have an answer for you, but I'll warn you, you may not be quite as eager to suck down a Big Mac and a Diet Coke after hearing this. Ronald McDonald, first introduced as the company's mascot in 1963, had a pretty good run, before finally being largely phased out by the company in the mid-2010s for a greater focus on the nasty little box homunculus. You can thank John Wayne Gacy, Pennywise, and those goofballs dressed up as clowns back in 2016 for that. But like anyone who loses favor stateside, Ronald had a prosperous career ahead of him outside the country. Well, not the Ronald we know, at least. You see, in an undisclosed cattle farm in 2004, most likely in North America, a monster was born. A horrific abomination birthed from a cow, like many have theorized about SCP-058, the Heart of Darkness. But this nasty little creature wasn't a giant heart with a stinger and scorpion legs. In many ways, it appeared superficially humanoid, save for its stark white skin, its thick red lips, and its full head of bright, frizzy red hair. But that was only the start of the unnerving strangeness exhibited by this miracle child. It was born with white gloves and long, clownish shoes seemingly grafted to its feet. Fresh from birth, the creature was huge, with a disproportionately large head and wide, disgusting pores that seemed to perpetually leak fry oil. The creature was unresponsive to any kind of external stimuli, perhaps suggesting it was brain dead, and it remained completely dormant most of the time. While most people would have screamed, run away, or called the police, the farmers at this particular cattle farm decided to let it ride and see how this whole nightmarish affair played out. That sense of curiosity and patience would soon pay off for them financially. It didn't take long for the creature to grow. The bigger it got, the more it looked like a giant mutant version of McDonald's iconic mascot, Ronald McDonald. And this wasn't just a coincidence either. It turned out that this monster was somehow intrinsically linked to the McDonald's brand, because once a day, the creature would horrifically unhinge its jaw and begin to barf out a huge quantity of McDonald's food. And we're not talking about raw materials that are converted into McDonald's food. The creature, later dubbed SCP-5962, vomited out fully packaged McDonald's products. The owners of this clownish monster had just hit the lottery, so to speak. While the particulars of the deal are unclear, they somehow contacted a representative of the McDonald's Corporation based in China. In exchange for presumably a large sum of money, Chinese McDonald's operatives covertly entered the country and shepherded the now massive creature over to a McDonald's-owned warehouse in Beijing. By this point, it was around 4 meters tall and weighed over 5 tons. It was kept inside a cage and housed at some cost, but soon enough, the creature was paying for itself. As we mentioned before, the creature constantly secreted fry oil, which was siphoned off for use in preparing McDonald's food across the country. The huge quantity of packaged food that it vomited out every day was also shipped off to restaurants across the country, making the Chinese branch of McDonald's incredibly financially successful. They were able to make an almost complete profit on all of these foods and drinks, once transport costs were subtracted, of course. SCP-5962 had become McDonald's China's best-kept secret. But of course, no secret this sensational could stay under wraps forever, no matter how much people in the warehouse were paid or threatened for their silence. If your day job was siphoning grease off of a giant mutant clown for the purpose of preparing McDonald's food across the country, there'd be no way you wouldn't speak to somebody about it. Nobody knows whose loose lips sunk this incredibly profitable ship, but rumors began to spread around Beijing about a huge clown inside of a McDonald's packaging facility. That was when local field agents of the SCP Foundation finally took notice. 2 agents, Jonathan Zhang and George Nagasaw, were dispatched to perform an infiltration mission along with a team of backup personnel. They entered the warehouse, apprehending any employees they found. As they and their reinforcements reached the northern side of the facility, they found SCP-5962 with a heavy collar around its neck, chained to the ground like King Kong, as McDonald's employees wheeled away carts of packaged food. Neither of the attending agents were fans of McDonald's food, but even then, just seeing this horrible display was enough to make them feel nauseous. The creature was taken and contained by the SCP Foundation, who conducted a number of tests on it. They found that the monster had no real internal organs save for 27 interconnected stomachs. Genetically, they also found that the creature was far more cow than human. The same could sadly not be said for the food that SCP-5962 was vomiting out. Seriously, if you were already feeling a little queasy from all this, we need to warn you that this is the part where things get really vile. Let's talk about what the McDonald's food barfed up by SCP-5962 was actually made out of. As we mentioned earlier, the food exuded by the creature was genetically human, with DNA often matching that of people who are alive and in no way affected by this anomalous process. Tests have indicated that certain foods, condiments, and beverages correspond to more specific types of bodily tissue and liquid. For example, the bacon and fries were shown to be cartilage and ligaments. The bread turned out to be made from hair, nails, and skin. The coffee was liquefied fecal matter. The chicken nuggets were made from fingers, ovaries, and testes. Even the water was a mix of saline and sweat. And of course, the ice cream was comprised of pus, bone marrow, feces, and nasal mucus, depending on the flavor. You get the idea. We'll stop listing off examples before you lose your lunch, but rest assured, all of the food produced by SCP-5962 was made of human organic matter. When the SCP Foundation interviewed Mr. Chen, the manager of the facility where SCP-5962 was being held, before his amnestic treatment, he seemed incredibly casual about the whole thing. As far as he was concerned, the food still tasted exactly the same as regular McDonald's food, and it didn't appear to have any adverse health effects beyond what you could expect from regular, non-anomalous fast food. It's actually less cruel and disturbing than the slaughterhouses where the meat is typically obtained. Mr. Chen also contested that SCP-5962 wasn't all that dangerous either. The only time it ever performed an offensive action was when an employee of the enemy fast food franchise, Burger King, entered its vicinity. The creature vomited a stream of hot coffee at the corporate interloper like a fire hose until he left, suggesting that it does have some kind of strange inherent loyalty to the McDonald's company. But still, other than this isolated incident, the creature has never even displayed sentience. It was a big, strange, clownish McDonald's food dispenser. When questioned about the origins of SCP-5962, Mr. Chen once again underplayed the strangeness of the situation, saying that he'd heard rumors the farm that sold him SCP-5962 had also sold other strange, anomalous creatures to eager buyers in the US. The farm, which we can only assume is situated right next to a radioactive waste dump, was also behind SCP-4158, also known as Big Charlie. This giant omnivorous and seemingly immortal mutant cow is believed to have been birthed from a non-anomalous cow sold to the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse. It looked hideous and seemed to suffer from a wide variety of health issues, leading to the employees at the slaughterhouse trying to put the creature out of its misery. However, no matter how hard they tried to kill the monster, it just wouldn't die. Its bones were pretty much indestructible, and no matter how much of its flesh was cut off, it just kept growing back, causing no ill effects to the creature itself. Eventually, the slaughterhouse workers tried cooking and eating the meat, leading to them discovering it tasted just as good as non-anomalous meat. Much like the Chinese McDonald's and SCP-5962, the workers had just hit the lottery with Big Charlie. As long as they kept feeding the monster, which ate everything from bricks to other non-anomalous cows, it provided a pretty much limitless supply of meat, giving them unprecedented economic prosperity. In other words, Big Charlie was a literal cash cow. Jeff Fine, the slaughterhouse director, even started worshipping Big Charlie as a kind of demigod by drinking his blood. He believed that Big Charlie was a savior, sent to lift them all out of their struggle and desperation. Sadly for them, the SCP Foundation sent them right back when Big Charlie escaped their slaughterhouse, and Foundation field agents found, secured, and contained it. It was a sad day for the Butcher's Block. So, what have we learned today? Whether you're in the US of A or the Chinese heartland, if you're chowing down on fast food, you really have no idea where it came from. I mean, we kind of knew that already, but for all we know, the food you're enjoying could have just been vomited up by a giant fat clown, or cut from the flesh of a mutated cow. Just think about that next time you're enjoying a burger. But hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We'll all probably still eat it.
The nightlife in Italy is famous worldwide. When the sun goes down, its cities come alive with locals and tourists alike, looking to party, have fun, and sometimes even get a little rowdy. But in an unknown town in Italy, there is a nightclub that offers a very different experience. For those who wander in, they might find themselves playing a role in a drama far more exciting and dangerous than the night out they expected. To the outside viewer, SCP-453 is nothing out of the ordinary. Just a standard nightclub filled with partygoers and revelers evening after evening. As typical as it may seem, the unassuming nature of the venue is nothing short of intentional by design.
It is actually a front, owned and operated by Foundation personnel who carefully monitor everyone who comes in and out,
keeping a watchful eye for any indication of drama or danger. Violence can and will erupt at any moment, and no matter what, no night at the club is ever routine. But the visitors' chaotic actions are not their own. Though the people's decision to attend the club is of their own free will, after some time settling into the environment, something changes. Over the course of the night, people begin to do things that may otherwise seem out of character for them. In fact, they are playing roles. Though the same roles are played each evening, they are played by different people night after night. Some of these dramas are harmless, but some are violent. and some may even be world-threatening. If the partygoers survive their role in their scripts, they will then leave the club and return home, with only a faint memory of the events they took part in that evening. The next night the process renews and the events will repeat, but not all scripts repeat at the same frequency. Some are regular, while others are only triggered by special circumstances. Only select people take part in these scripts, while the others around them go about their night until triggered to take on a role. And these bizarre performances may have been going on for a very long time. The building now known as SCP-453 may have existed in some form or another even before the Foundation existed, with investigations of the site indicating that it was once a villa of a powerful Roman senator who held extensive parties every night. These pervasive affairs, the odd happenings that occurred during them, may have left a lasting imprint, because no matter what is built on the site, it seems as though people are attracted to the building to party. The Foundation has had possession of the site for a long time, and in a previous attempt to neutralize its chaotic power, they even went as far as demolishing it completely to the ground, but that still proved ineffective. Even when there was no villa or nightclub present, large groups of revelers would still gather. The gatherings would turn into street parties, the street parties into riots. Many times these circumstances were cause for even worse consequences than the regular series of events. The Foundation didn't know how to stop the scripted nightclub, but they could maybe control it. If the people wanted a nightclub, the Foundation would give them one. The site was rebuilt from scratch, and from the outside looking in had all the characteristics of your standard everyday disco watering hole. But really, it was meticulously constructed to be a sophisticated SCP facility, capable of handling whatever anomalous activity was thrown at it. Built from the same materials used in all other SCP containment sites, and always staffed with containment personnel on high alert, ready to handle the more violent and dangerous scripts that may play out at any moment. But control over the scripted nightclub may be more easily said than done. The nightclub has been in operation for a long time, and over the years the staff has noticed some extremely odd events taking place. For instance, certain things aren't always where they're supposed to be. Aspects of the club are built and then slowly shifted to new locations within the site over time. Most notable, the weapons locker on site for staff to suppress violent incidents has slowly been drifting towards the men's restroom and away from the secured section for staff only. And it's not the only part of the building slowly shuffling its way about. Could SCP-453 be learning to foil the Foundation? And if so, why? While many of the scripts that play out in the nightclub are harmless, some are of more concern. The Foundation has been studying what triggers different scripts, and while some seem to inevitably play out and pull people in, others are triggered by the presence of different guests. The Silver Harlequins will only play out if more than 15 guests are over the age of 60, but there are a few distinct characteristics of the scripts. All begin at approximately 9 p.m. at night, and while people continue behaving in modern ways, there is one key difference. All scripted dialogue takes place entirely in Latin. The Foundation believes that these scripts may be playing out events that happened in the initial incarnations of the club back in Roman times. While the players differ, the events always remain the same, and while the scripts rotate, SCP-453 seems to gravitate towards 3 scripts, all posing unique challenges for the Foundation, and one posing a potential end-of-the-world scenario. First up, Script 43, the Cheating Wife. This is normally the most common script and poses a relatively small threat to those not actively engaged in the script or outside the nightclub. The main priority is to have the staff's medical team on site and ready to intervene when things get bloody. It begins at 9:49 p.m. when a young woman heads to the men's bathroom. She will be followed by 3 men. The events of the bathroom are expunged, but a little over an hour later, a 4th male will enter the picture. It's the husband of the woman, and he's not happy. He will enter the nightclub, order a bottle of red wine, and head to the bathroom. There, he will brutally assault the 3 men, knocking all 3 unconscious and causing minor brain trauma to the 3rd. He will then drag his wife out of the restroom, cursing her and accusing her of infidelity as he takes her out of the nightclub. The script then terminates, and all participants no longer remember the events beyond a bar fight. Medical attention is recommended for the 3 men and the woman, especially the most severely injured of the men. But after the script concludes, strange events continue to happen. While none of the participants know each other before the script begins and don't maintain memory of the exact events, they display strange behavior. The man playing the husband becomes violent when questioned and develops an obsession with the woman playing his wife. The Foundation believes it wise to keep these 2 individuals separated. Oddly, SCP-453 seems to prefer men who are shorter and less physically strong than the other men to play the husband. Attempts to short-circuit the script have proved unsuccessful, only delaying it. An attempt to remove the weapon, a wine bottle, has led to the husband using more dangerous weapons like a bar stool instead, which can lead to fatalities. It seems that SCP-453 gets what it wants, and what it wants is for the show to go on. Then there is Script 21, the Senator's Visit. This is considered a higher priority script, and the Foundation knows to be on high alert for medical intervention to prevent fatalities. This one kicks off at 10:13 p.m. as a civilian steps into the club and takes the role of the Senator, the original owner of the villa. He is accompanied by an entourage of 13 servants, each carrying improvised weapons. And when they step in, the club stops dead in anticipation of the coming events, because 2 people in the club just became assassins. The Senator and his servants take over a table, and the Senator begins ordering extravagant food and drinks. He'll always gravitate towards the most expensive items available from the current stock, and his orders are always completed at specific times, no matter how the Foundation tries to intervene. During his meal, a civilian selected to be an activist will approach the Senator and begin criticizing the treatment of the citizens in a nearby city, only to be assaulted brutally by 3 members of the entourage. The Foundation will take her away for medical treatment after she's left for dead. If you think that's brutal, be prepared, because the Senator's night is about to get a whole lot more dangerous. The first of 2 assassins will then approach the Senator, pull a blade, and attack him. The assassin will be intercepted by 4 servants who will kill him, despite the best efforts of Foundation personnel to prevent the outcome. But it's the second assassin who is of far greater concern. He will incite a brawl among civilians around the eastern wall of the club, then use the chaos to attack 7 of the servants as he approaches the Senator. Those servants are of priority for medical intervention, but the chaos makes it impossible to intercept them until 10 minutes after midnight. The assassin will then engage with the remaining servants, barely surviving, and eventually stab the Senator in the neck fatally. The Foundation has been unable to prevent this, and the danger isn't over yet. The fight at the nightclub will continue to escalate, causing more injuries but no more fatalities, until over an hour has passed and 19 civilians take on the role of Roman guards. They'll pacify the crowd and clear the club. This is when the Foundation can finally intervene and treat the wounded. Much like the first smaller-scale script, any attempts to interrupt the flow of the events taking place will be unsuccessful, and often result in more deaths. None of the large number of participants remember the events, only believing they were in a brutal bar fight. This is one of the most common scripts, and the Foundation's only priority is to try to minimize casualties with quick medical intervention. But one script hints at a much darker event at the club, and that's Script 82, the Plurality Cult. Most scripts begin before midnight and plunge the club into chaos, but if no script has started before then and the club seems mundane, the Foundation knows to get ready. They'll suit up in riot gear designed to withstand neurotoxins and claim to the guests that this is part of a theme night. At roughly 2 hours after midnight, the events will begin with one civilian standing in the center of the room saying, "The time of plurality has come." At least half of the other civilians will then join in saying, "We embrace the many." But there is something different about this script. Sometimes Foundation staff members will join in. This is the most dangerous script at SCP-453, and staff knows to immediately terminate any Foundation member who has been converted, because Intervention 453-82 Pariah is about to begin, and there is no room for error.
First, any civilians who did not become engaged in the cult should be immediately evacuated to a safe holding area if possible. The priority then turns to subduing the cultists by any means necessary. The security team should attempt to restrain them and keep them alive, but lethal force may be necessary. The cultists have a priority of their own though. They will not respond to any attacks by the security team, and will instead begin a Latin chant that ends with their leader laughing hysterically and offering a toast to the club. The club will seemingly return to normal, but the danger is just beginning. Before 2:25 a.m., all the cultists and all civilians must be removed from the premises, by any means necessary. If other attempts have failed, the Foundation will release Type 14 neurotoxic gas into the club to eliminate anyone on site, with one exception. The cult leader is not to be harmed under any circumstances. If the cult leader is harmed in any way or the staff has not subdued the cult by 2:30 a.m., the Foundation will trigger a self-destruct mechanism that will eliminate the threat, for now. The site's unique properties cannot be stopped, but the script can be stopped in its tracks. The clock cannot be allowed to reach 3 a.m. under any circumstances. More worrisome, this script is becoming more and more frequent. The cycle continues, but the Foundation is focused on containment. The club is to be staffed at all times by bartenders, bouncers, cleaners, and emergency and medical staff, as well as at least 10 security staff members and 2 observation personnel. All are responsible for studying and memorizing the scripts, and being prepared to handle any scripted events that occur. The site is to be inspected and measured regularly for any changes, and to make sure all its security measures are in working order. The site will be locked every day between 4 a.m. and 8 p.m. to prepare for the night ahead, because at 8 p.m. on the dot, SCP-453 opens for business, seeking new players for its drama of the night.
Hey folks, welcome back to SCP Explained. Sorry if I seem a little out of it today. Truth be told, I've been having real trouble sleeping lately. Perhaps it's because I spend so much time pouring through the files of the SCP Foundation archive. Also, I've been catching up on the West Wing. There's plenty of creatures, entities, objects, and tales that are very effective at making you lose sleep, but none quite as effective as SCP-966. Grab yourself a pot of coffee and prop your eyelids open with some matchsticks or tape, because you need to stay alert if you want to survive this one. Though when you get on the wrong side of SCP-966, I'm sorry to tell you that your chances of survival are extremely low. And after experiencing its primary anomalous effects, the question of how long you'll even want to survive will become disturbingly prescient. Like many of our explorations into the living nightmares that the SCP Foundation deals with on a daily basis, the best way to experience exactly what SCP-966 can do is to take a look at a case study regarding one of its many unfortunate victims. In this case, that victim is a man named Terry Hallberg from New Mexico. In another life, perhaps Terry would have been an ideal candidate for a junior researcher position at the SCP Foundation. He was a scientific-minded truth seeker whose interests lied in the more esoteric fields of study, namely ghosts and aliens. Proving the existence of life in the stars and the supernatural in general was something he considered to be his life's work. This is why he moved to New Mexico, home of Roswell, and widely considered to be the UFO capital of the United States in the first place. There, he'd perform experiments on a wide range of bizarre phenomenon, from exploring haunted houses to obsessively watching the sky for any anomalous activity. He'd become a bigwig in his niche online paranormal investigation community, and his posts on the somewhat infamous Parawatch forum always garnered plenty of attention. But Terry wanted more. He wasn't in it for the fame, or the money, or the legions of insatiable paranormal investigator groupies. He was a true believer. He wanted a close, first-hand experience with the supernatural, and that was exactly what he was about to get, in addition to a very harsh lesson about being careful what you wish for. It began when he got called out to Albuquerque for a strange case of cattle mutilation. For those who don't frequent the Parawatch forums quite as often as Terry, cattle mutilation is the most common nickname for the phenomenon of large livestock, usually cows, being found dead with unusual mutilation patterns on their corpses. While the particulars of what exactly this means varies from believer to believer, with theories ranging from aliens to black helicopters,
It is widely accepted across all branches of paranormal enthusiasts that when cattle are being mutilated, something very strange is afoot. Terry arrived at the ranch, and with the application of a little cash to grease the appropriate palms, he was able to conduct a recorded interview with the rancher. He was a weathered man in his early 60s, with a somewhat frantic demeanor and profoundly tired eyes. When Terry asked him if he'd experienced any unusual phenomenon in the days leading up to the cattle mutilation incident, he was surprisingly forthcoming about the hellish conditions he'd been experiencing lately. The strange experiences had been going on for several days now. It all started when the rancher noticed that a number of his cows weren't sleeping. This isn't the easiest thing to spot in a cow, because cattle engage in what is known as polyphasic sleep, where instead of sleeping for one prolonged period like humans typically do, they sleep in small intervals throughout a 24-hour period. Cows can even sleep standing up for periods of light rest, but during REM sleep, which all mammals need for healthy functioning, they lay down just like us. The problem was, in the last several days, many of the rancher's cows hadn't slept at all. It was after this that the rancher seemingly began to have bizarre paranormal experiences himself. It began with a general sense of unease and dread, which was soon followed by a sense of severe insomnia that had left him completely unable to sleep for the past 2 days. During this period, things had gotten worse. He'd experienced strange noises around his home, footsteps, what sounded like hushed voices, and occasionally even what could only be identified as a low, croaking growl. But it wasn't just noises. There was also physical evidence of some kind of intrusion. Items had been knocked over or moved. At one point, a glass of water, which had been centralized on a stable surface, had somehow fallen off the edge and shattered. The old rancher, with a trembling voice, even stated that he'd seen things moving in the corners of his eyes. Figures, shapes, little green men. And then, the cattle mutilation spree began. It may have sounded morbid, but Terry had to use everything in his power to stop himself from smiling ear to ear. While this was a terrifying experience for the rancher, for Terry, this was an absolutely textbook case of paranormal experience. And here he was, the very first person to document it all. It could be the next Skinwalker Ranch or Rendlesham Forest incident, and his name would forever be attached to it. He asked the rancher if he could see the cow's body, and the rancher obliged. Whatever had caused this, alien, ghost, or otherwise, had really done a number on this cow. Good portions of its abdomen had been torn away, with evidence of what appeared to be biting and clawing. This poor beast had been eaten alive. While exploring the wounds with a magnifying glass, a scalpel, and a large pair of tweezers, Terry discovered something incredible. Something frankly unprecedented for a cattle mutilation case. A piece of evidence left behind directly by whatever had perpetrated this act of gruesome violence. A long, thin, and exceedingly sharp claw, around 12 centimeters in length and broken at one end. New Mexico's large predators included mountain lions, black bears, bobcats, and coyotes, and this claw was nothing like any of those. In fact, it was nothing like Terry had ever seen before. Was this his big moment? Had he discovered evidence of an entirely new supernatural creature or a specimen of extraterrestrial life? He was practically vibrating with excitement about this new discovery. After thanking and paying the rancher again, Terry took some photos, gathered some more samples, and left. He had everything he needed to conduct a groundbreaking investigation into the supernatural. Just wait until the folks on Parawatch heard about this. In all his excitement, as he drove back home from the ranch, he never once stopped to consider what he might be bringing back with him. But really, in the end, it didn't even matter. From the moment he stepped onto that ranch, Terry Hallberg was already doomed. He just didn't know it yet. He arrived home and began to record all of his information onto one master document. He also began obsessively assembling outside research, hoping to find similar cases that he could add to this emerging pattern. It was a mix of phenomenon from both hauntings and alien encounters. Could this possibly be some form of alien ghost? The dream find of every paranormal investigator. Terry had to still his racing heart as the possibilities bombarded his mind. He could have been working with the paranormal find of the century here. In fact, he was so excited by all of this, he didn't even realize that he worked through the entire night. He didn't sleep a wink. After all, how could you, when such important research needed to be done? The burst of nocturnal energy felt like a godsend. The next night,
not so much. In the meantime, Terry had compiled his information together enough to present it to his esteemed paranormal colleagues on the Parawatch forums. They were startled and amazed by what they were seeing and hearing, especially the taped interview with the rancher and the mysterious claw. One of Terry's closest associates, who went by the username John Station, pulled up a similar bizarre case of a Los Angeles hiker who died in the hills. In the days before his death, his family and friends reported him complaining about insomnia and experiencing an increasing state of paranoia and distress. He started taking long walks across remote trails in hopes of tiring himself out enough to finally get some sleep, but that time never came. When his corpse was found, it was mauled and half-eaten. Everyone assumed that a mountain lion had killed him, and other scavengers had fed on him before his body was found. But now, Terry wasn't so sure. The more they looked into it, the more they found strange and unpleasant deaths connected to people suffering from what seemed like severe insomnia. Despite its debilitating effects, the only type of insomnia that directly causes death is the exceedingly rare genetic condition fatal familial insomnia, which couldn't account for the sheer number of deaths the Parawatch team were finding. In their minds, there was only one reasonable conclusion. The deaths weren't the result of the insomnia itself, but whatever was causing it. It was only then that Terry noticed his own inability to sleep, and his previous excitement was gradually replaced with panic. At first, he tried to keep it all in proportion, knowing that it's easy to invent things to fear when you're in uncharted territory. But as the days passed and the sleep never came, his worry became unassailable. Terry knew that he hadn't just discovered a new paranormal phenomenon, he was becoming one of its victims. He became increasingly paranoid over the next few days, taking constant EVP readings from around his apartment in hopes of detecting whatever was around him. There were strange noises, frightening noises. He just knew it. But little did poor Terry know, there was a very good reason he couldn't detect his tormentors. While he had been in his apartment for days now, he had no hope of ever seeing them. The human eye's spectrum of visible light is around 380 to 750 nanometers, but the monsters who deprived him of his ability to sleep existed somewhere around 900. They were entirely undetectable to the human eye, and they were waiting for their latest meal. As the insomnia grew worse, Terry received some frightening news. That rancher who he'd spoken to a few days before was found dead on his property, with severe injuries comparable to that of a wild animal attack. Just like his cattle, and just like all the other strange cases the Parawatch forum had found, first the insomnia, then the frightening paranormal experiences, and then Terry felt something warm and wet trickling down the back of his neck. He probably would have realized it was his own blood if a 20-centimeter claw, just like the one he had pulled out of the dead cow, hadn't just pierced his brainstem. Terry Hallberg had finally gotten what he wanted, a first-hand experience with the supernatural, and all he had to do was die. But in his defense, being saved from SCP-966, a whole species of monsters known as the Sleep Killers, is almost worse than being killed by them. When they release their deadly energy pulse, their primary anomalous effect, which induces sleeplessness on anyone or anything in their immediate 20-meter radius, the effects are permanent. They essentially induce fatal insomnia, and your only options are to die by their claws or live long enough to see your own body and mind give out from the horrible effects of true sleep deprivation. They travel in pairs, and because of their invisibility, you never know when they're lurking around you, waiting to rob you of your sleep and then your life. The Foundation currently has 4 specimens in containment, but believe us, there are a lot more out there, and they're hungry. Sleep tight, if you can. There is something deeply unsettling about an old house at night. What is beautiful, if a bit worse for wear during the day, can take on a sinister cast once the sun goes down. The moan of the wind outside, the creak of the floorboards, the scraping of a branch against a window. Maybe one of these sounds jolts you awake in the dead of night, eyes opening to a room full of shadows turned twisted and eerie in the darkness. Of course, it's probably nothing supernatural, just an old house settling mixed with your own paranoia. But sometimes, every so often, it is something more. Sometimes you're not as alone in an old house as you think you are. That's certainly the case if you ever find yourself staying in SCP-2696, also known as the Haunted Victorian Mansion of Dark Peak. In 1869, wealthy and renowned industrialist and scholar of the occult Henry Percival Rosyth built a stately home, known as Rosyth Hall, to house him, his wife Clara, and any children they might have in the future. It was constructed to provide Henry with ample space to conduct his arcane research, Clara with a beautiful sitting room and a flower garden to tend, and their future children with lots of space to play and run around as they grew. After an uneventful year in the house, Clara gave birth to 2 baby boys named Edgar and Miles. For a time, the family was happy there. Unfortunately, this happiness was to be short-lived, as the grim specter of death soon began to loom over Rosyth Hall. In January of 1873, Clara was overcome with a sudden fever and died in her bed. This loss pushed the already eccentric Henry over the edge, and he began making strange changes to the house's interior structure. He added hallways that led to dead ends, strangely angled floors, and twisting corners, turning a once comfortable and lived-in home into something unrecognizable. In August of that same year, Henry's children Edgar and Miles also suddenly passed away, leaving Henry alone at his estate as he continued his descent into madness. He kept modifying the house, expanding from the mansion's library and tower to the rest of the building's rooms. Henry's days were spent supervising the construction around the house, refusing to let the workers carry on without his strict oversight, worried that otherwise his vision would be corrupted. His nights were spent sleepless as he worked away in the tower and in the nursery on the 2nd floor. No one was permitted to witness his work during the night, but his household staff complained of strange sounds, flashing lights, and strange whispers. Many were so unsettled by these sounds and Mr. Rosyth's erratic behavior that they quit their jobs without notice. A wise choice given the circumstances. As his staff dwindled, so too did Henry Rosyth's already fragile grip on reality. His requests for materials became more and more imposing. He demanded 200 kilograms of ground stone from Isle of Anglesey in Wales, and 37 meters of pipes made from an amalgam of mercury and copper, among other unconventional materials. But Rosyth still had money to burn, and no family to spend it on anymore, so his every strange request was accommodated, for a time anyway. In June of 1876, exhausted and unsettled by the long hours of work, the ever-increasingly strange projects, and the unusual supernatural phenomena around the house, the remainder of Rosyth's workers quit. He then fired all of his household staff, with the exception of his loyal housekeeper, and resumed his work in solitude. Though the specifics of just what Mr. Rosyth was trying to achieve would likely have gone to the grave with him, some of his diary entries were recovered from the house, and they provide a peek into his motives and nature of the mansion's anomalous activity. After the death of his wife and children, he became obsessed with the concept of the mind-made body. The notion that having a memory so strong that, if given the proper energetic conditions, it could take on corporeal form. His theory was, if a memory is engraved permanently in the mind, it could then take on a permanent physical and energetic manifestation. He began to experiment with this concept, determined to bring back a form of his wife and children by any means necessary, a noble pursuit that paved the way for madness. It is during this process that he began to remodel the house in order to provide the ideal energetic conditions for his memories to be made material. Eventually, his notes devolved into nonsense, and the pages were covered with geometric equations and blood. His final entry reads,
"The children still speak in her voice. I fear I might be going mad."
It is true that he might have been losing his grip on sanity towards the end of his experiments, but his work undeniably filled the house with something. It was not long before reports of strange sights and sounds around the Rosyth home reached the ears of those trained to investigate such matters. The house and its anomalous nature were initially discovered by Jitinder Jaishankar, an occultist and investigator employed by the Royal Foundation for the Secure Containment of the Paranormal, or RFSCP. He wrote the first official report on the house in 1876, after investigating multiple rumors of ghostly sightings around the house. He and his team, a married pair of ghost hunters named the Bartons, arrived at the Rosyth home with a sense of apprehension. They were ushered through the door by a housekeeper, who made the eerie promise that Henry Rosyth would be with them shortly. When the master of the house came to greet them, the investigative team was shocked by his appearance. He was gaunt, almost skeletal, with a dark, deep-set eyes bleary from entirely too long without sleep. He looked as if he had aged 100 years in the few years since his wife's death. The team stayed the night in the house, experiencing a restless and nightmare-addled sleep until 2:30 a.m., when the investigative work was to begin. They descended down to the main hall of the house, where a large black door was all that stood between them and the unknown. It opened with a bone-deep groan, as if to warn them not to enter, but still they stepped inside. Once they crossed the threshold, they were greeted with odd angles, a garish array of colors and materials, and bewilderingly high ceilings. All to Mr. Rosyth's very demanding specifications, of course. He spared no expense in making his nonsensical nightmare house an unsettling reality. The Bartons presented dowsing rods, which they used to measure spiritual activity in the room. At first, nothing happened, but soon the dowsing rods began to spark viciously, and a sudden gust of wind blew out all the candles in the room. There was nothing but darkness, and a sudden sense of a heavy presence among them. The Bartons dropped to the floor, with Mrs. Barton leaking blood from her mouth and Dr. Barton convulsing violently. The presence grew stronger, and though it did not speak, it was unmistakable who it was. It was the deceased Clara Rosyth. Jaishankar fled the manor, dragging his unconscious companions out as fast as he could. Once safely away from the mansion, he immediately contacted the RFSCP, well, as quickly as one can when communicating by telegram. A second team was sent to investigate the house in the following days, but when they arrived, Henry Rosyth could not be found. There was no sign of a struggle, no body. He simply vanished. He was never seen again. The SCP Foundation has an official record of two separate incorporeal entities that dwell within the walls of SCP-2696. The first, SCP-2696-1, appears to be the ghost or memory, energetic signature, whatever you wish to call it, of Clara Rosyth. The apparition is the one that Jintinder Jaikanshar and the Bartons encountered. She is translucent and intangible, and most frequently appears in the form of Clara as a young mother at the pinnacle of her good health. She has also occasionally taken on several inhuman forms, including a wilting plumeria bush and a disturbing column of bone, muscle, and flesh. Exposure to the Clara entity has a pronounced negative effect on anyone who comes near her. People that come within several feet of SCP-2696 have reported mild visual and auditory hallucinations, such as creeping shadows and whispering voices chanting in foreign languages. There have also been reports of amnesia, fainting, seizures, bleeding from the nose, mouth, and ears, and in the most severe cases, dissociative episodes that result in complete losses of identity. Many of these physical side effects are thought to be the result of the massive amounts of radiation that have been measured being given off by the entity. The second entity in the house, known as SCP-2696-2, is actually two entities that always seem to come as a pair. Known as 2A and 2B, these are the skeletons of Miles and Edgar Rosyth, the deceased children of Clara and Henry. They are located inside of the nursery, which is inaccessible to outsiders, with a door that seems able to seal itself shut at will and keep researchers out. The two skeletons are largely inactive, remaining on the floor of the nursery in the fetal position at nearly all times. They only become active during periods of extreme activity from the Clara entity. When Clara is especially active and attempting to leave her usual domain in the house's tower, the skeletons have been reported to wrestle and play with each other, dance around the room, or stand at the door to the nursery, appearing to be waiting for something. One notable occasion, though, on June 12, 1990, both instances of SCP-2696-2 were able to actually leave the nursery and travel elsewhere in the house. A series of massive lightning strikes raised the energy levels in the house, and Clara's radiation levels suddenly spiked significantly. Surge protectors placed in the house failed, and Clara became more active than usual, transforming into a swirling dark mass that emitted an ear-splitting shriek. The front door of the mansion slammed itself shut and refused to open, trapping the research team who were present at the time. They were only able to exit after SCP-2696-2A and 2B were spotted leaving the nursery. Hand in hand, they approached Clara and opened their arms to her. Pacified, perhaps by some distant echo of a mother's love, the entity quieted, and the Foundation team was finally able to leave. It is still unknown how 2A and 2B were able to leave the nursery, but there have not been any incidences of this level since. Currently, the Dark Peak Mansion remains standing, and is largely untouched from how its creator left it. The SCP Foundation maintains a strict perimeter of 1 square kilometer around the house, and no civilians are permitted to cross it. Not only is the building restricted for civilians, most SCP personnel are also forbidden from entering the house. Some of the only ones who are allowed inside are a special class of SCP Foundation personnel, Experimental Containment Research Group, or ECRG, and MTF Theta 77, nicknamed Who You Gonna Call. Given what was learned in the 1990 activation event, it is apparent that the containment procedures have a rate of failure that does not adequately contain SCP-2696-1, and according to the containment file, there is a 47% chance of Clara breaching containment completely by 2030. Catherine Stedman once wrote, "Houses aren't haunted, people are." Henry Rosyth was so haunted by the loss of his beloved wife and children that he could not stand to live in his big, empty house all alone. Henry Rosyth may be long gone, but his attempts to grasp at that which was long gone before him have forever changed the house he built. His grief, his pain, his energy filled the house with echoes of his loved ones, and as pain often does when left untreated, it began to fester and turn foul. Dr. Henry Rosyth was a deeply haunted man, and now his haunted house is all that remains of him. Welcome to planet Earth. She's got the toughest streets around, and if you're not careful, that mean old missy won't hesitate to wash out her gutters with your blood and decorate the sidewalks with your teeth. It's a tough world for the good and innocent, with the looming shadow of crime lurking around every corner, just waiting to prey on those who are unable to defend themselves. If you don't have the tools to survive, it'll chew you up and spit you out like a wad of stale chewing gum. That's why we need a hero, a dark defender, a cloak in the night. We need the Specter. New Delhi, India. A woman walks home from her late-night job. She's exhausted. She can feel the bone-deep ache of 14 hours on a factory line, running herself ragged to support her 3 kids back home. She can barely stand. Can you really blame her for wanting to take the shortcut down that dark alley, knowing it'll shave 15 minutes off her trip? She ducks in, clutching her purse tight and keeping her head down, but it won't do any good. A predator has been lying in wait. He emerges from the darkness, wielding a huge knife, and grabs her by the shoulder. He's a few heads taller than her, with arms thicker than her neck. He tells her to hand over the money she'd spent all month working for, or he'd turn her kids into orphans. His knife had tasted blood before, and he'd have no problem killing again. With tears streaking down her face, knowing it's futile to resist, she reaches out and passes him the money. The bandit snatches it from her trembling hand and snickers, candy from a baby. He's ready to turn around and make a run with tonight's takings when he feels an odd chill drift into the alley. A soft whoosh. He turns and sees a figure standing and watching him. He's tall and well-built, with a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He was darker than the dark. Light seemed to disappear into him, a black shape against the background. It's him, the man that all criminals know and fear, all over the world, even if they've never met him. The intrusive thought, the moment of creeping doubt that slithers into their minds, the second they even contemplate breaking the law. The bad guy's boogeyman.
The Specter. Halt, evildoer! The Specter commands. You'll return this fine lady's money, or you'll suffer the consequences.
The bandit feels a tremor of fear quiver through him, but he won't back down. Not yet. He charges
the Specter
with this blade, slashing like a madman, but not a single hit lands. The Specter weaves perfectly away from every strike and effortlessly disarms the bandit with a perfectly placed whack to the wrist. The knife clatters to the ground. He discombobulates the bandit with an open palm strike to either side of his head, then knocks him out with a laser-focused headbutt. He crumples to the ground unconscious, and the Specter breathes a sigh. Another battle won. This whole time, the woman has been watching frozen in awe. The Specter picks up her stolen money and hands it back to her with a gentlemanly doff of his wide-brimmed hat. He really is just darkness underneath, unseeable, unknowable, a living shadow. She thanks him, and he assures her that it's all in a day's work for a crime fighter like him. After all, somebody needs to do it. And in a flash of smoke, he's gone. The woman makes it home safely that night. London, England. A man lays beaten and bloody on the ground. 3 assailants surround him, circling like hungry wolves. One wields a long lead pipe, still slick with the man's blood. Another a switchblade that he keeps clicking in and out of the handle. And the third carries a handgun, the same handgun he's used to take 2 lives before. The wounded man on the ground, with bruises, cuts, a broken ankle, a broken wrist, 4 broken ribs, and 3 missing teeth, is desperate and afraid. He's here because he was forced into a corner. He needed to borrow money from a dangerous man tucked away in a dingy building in London's East End, the city's organized crime epicenter. The money he'd borrow came with predatory interest that he couldn't pay back. Now he's paying the difference in blood to that same loan shark's violent goons. The man with the gun in a thick Cockney accent tells him that this is why he shouldn't have messed around with Mr. Ford. Now he's going to be an example for anyone else stupid enough to think they can stiff the big man on a payment and live to tell the tale. He nods to the man with the pipe to finish the job. The beaten and bloodied man on the ground closes his eyes as the goon steps closer, lifting up the red-stained pipe and preparing to finally cave his pitiful head in with it. In the dark, he hears the whoosh of the pipe's downswing, and the breeze hits his bruised cheek, but the pipe never connects. Instead, there's a chorus of gasps. The man on the ground opens his eyes to get a better look at what on earth has happened. A tall, dark man in a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat is standing over him, holding the lead pipe that he just easily snatched from the hands of its previous user. The goons are all stepping back. The gunman raises his pistol, the other his knife. All of them look afraid. The man on the ground doesn't know the stranger who just saved his life, but in his presence, he feels something wash over him that he hasn't felt in a long while. Safety. It's him. It's
the Specter. You wretched villains, do you know better than to pick on the weak, a bunch of tough guys like you? How about fighting someone your own size?
In a blind panic, the gunman raises his pistol and fires. The Specter moves like smoke in the wind. He dodges the bullet and tosses the lead pipe. It sails through the air and hits the gunman's skull with an almighty crack. He collapses, dropping his weapon. The other 2 goons bum-rush him, but it doesn't serve them any better. One slashes, the other punches. With a few skillful fluid movements, he guides one goon's knife-wielding hand into the other's shoulder, then disables both with a pair of simultaneous chops to the throat, like that Jackie Chan himself would be proud of. All 3 goons are laid out on the ground, either writhing and gasping or knocked out cold.
The Specter
Straightens his coat and hat with practiced finesse and returns to the man laying on the ground. After checking that he was still alive and conscious, he passed the man a wad of cash and a phone, telling him to call an ambulance and get his wounds treated. None of those men would ever bother him again, and if they or any others dared to, then they could expect to see the dark figure of
the Specter
appearing behind them in their bathroom mirror. After all, someone needs to be there to fight crime, even when nobody else will. New York City, USA. Things are going sideways at a major bank downtown. A group of well-armed, highly organized robbers has broken in. They've taken at least 50 hostages throughout the building and have informed the police blockade outside that unless their demands are met and they're given free passage out of the building, they'll start executing people left and right. And given the ruthless organization of this particular criminal crew, it seems more than likely that they'll put their blood money where their mouth is. Police squad cars form a horseshoe blockade around the building outside, armed with handguns, shotguns, and assault rifles. Police snipers are finding their ideal perches in the surrounding skyscrapers.
SWAT is on the way and a police helicopter circles above. However, even if everything goes right, the higher-ups know that some fatalities are basically inevitable. Crews of hardcore career criminals like this wouldn't go down without a fight. One way or another, some lives would be taken today. Another transmission is delivered from the inside after that. The robbers know that time isn't on their side, so they're flipping the script. 5 minutes exactly. If their demands aren't met by then, blood would be staining the bank's immaculate marble floor. Tick-tock. The negotiators on the front line are in a cold sweat.
5 minutes? No, that isn't enough time. We can't mobilize. There'll be a massacre in there.
How could 10 greedy maniacs with assault rifles pull the rug out from under them all like this? Panicked thoughts swim through the head of a sergeant heading the blockade. He can't concede. His superiors would never allow it. Does he wait 5 minutes and see what happens? Or authorize his officers to breach the front doors, try to reclaim the bank, and potentially create one of the worst bank robbery bloodbaths in New York City history? Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. And every second, the time to decide runs out. That's when he hears a soft whoosh behind him. Paranoid enough to jump at shadows, the sergeant turns reaching for his gun and sees what seems to be a dapper shadow standing right behind him. A tall man with a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat. No face, just darkness itself under the shade of the brim. The stranger places a calm hand on his shoulder, and suddenly a sense of trust like he hasn't felt in years just sets in. Somehow deep in his marrow, he knows that this man is here to help.
Rest assured, Sergeant, everything is under control now. For I, the Specter, have arrived to save the day. How many criminals are inside?
The sergeant murmurs,
10 in all. The Specter nods. Worry not, Sergeant. Nobody will die today.
And with that, like the ghost that is his very namesake,
the Specter
is gone. Inside the bank, the leader of the robbers checks his watch. 2 minutes, and still no word from the cops outside. He's starting to lose his patience. A few unfortunate bank tellers and customers crouch around him, their hands behind their heads. 5 of his men are out here with him, armed and keeping the situation under control. The other 4 have cracked the security on the vault, and they're hauling out money by the bagful. And still silence from the cops. He sneers, and the thought crosses his mind that perhaps if he takes out a hostage or 2 now, the mooks out there might actually take his threats seriously. That thought amuses him.
Yeah, that'll show them. They'll finally know who they're dealing with here.
The leader shoulders his assault rifle and draws a bead on the hostages sitting closest to him. Even his men are shocked by the suddenness of it all, but they know better than to second-guess their boss at a time like this. He was always a little trigger-happy. The hostage, an older gentleman who'd only come into the bank to check his balance because he hadn't figured out how to do it online just yet, sees the gun and winces. He survived NAM, and this was how he was going to go. Gunned down on a Wednesday afternoon by some creep for chump change. What a world. The leader's finger curls around the trigger, but before he can complete a squeeze, an expertly aimed fist collides with the back of his head, knocking him unconscious in a single strike. The leader collapses, his rifle sliding across the ground.
The Specter
stands where he stood, straightening his coat and blowing dandruff off of his knuckles.
Are you fellas ready to dance?
He growls. He glides through them, moving with the grace of a prima ballerina and hitting with the force of a freight train. The goons are down before any of them can fire a single shot. With the help of some quick-thinking bank tellers,
the Specter
closes the vault door from the outside, trapping the remaining 4 robbers inside. Textbook crime fighting once more. The bank customers and employees, weeping with joy and relief, thank
the Specter
for saving their lives. He shakes his hand and assures them it was nothing, just doing what he could, as any concerned citizen should. He would have left after that, were it not for one little problem. The NYPD has a number of employees at different levels of their sprawling structure that are actually deeply embedded undercover agents of the SCP Foundation. And this isn't a comic book. There's a word for when a mysterious man made from darkness appears from nowhere and effortlessly takes down 10 heavily armed, highly trained combatants by himself. And that word was anomalous. Knowing what this mysterious combatant was capable of,
the Foundation sends some of their best mobile task force operatives to apprehend him, under the guise of just being standard SWAT team members sent in to get the situation back under control in the aftermath of the robbery. However, much to their extreme surprise, the Specter puts up absolutely no resistance to them. He understands that the men here to apprehend him are servants of law and order, and would not defy their will, but he pleads with them to reconsider.
You don't understand, sirs. You're making a huge mistake, he says, distraught. I'm here to help. I'm the Specter, defender of the innocent, scourge of the evildoer. You can't lock me away. You can't. The people need me.
As tragic as it is to see a genuinely benevolent anomaly beg for his freedom, the Mobile Task Force's hearts have long since hardened to this kind of thing. He wouldn't be the first sapient humanoid anomaly to speedrun all 7 stages of grief on their knees in front of them, and he probably wouldn't be the last. Foundation protocol is to tag and bag either way, even if they just use their anomalous abilities to thwart a bank robbery.
The Specter
is hauled back to the nearest Foundation containment site and held in a holding cell while researchers prepare to conduct initial tests and questioning. Everything seems so run-of-the-mill. Little do they notice, something extremely strange is starting to happen to New York City beyond the containment chamber's walls. They're about to learn the true devastating consequences of keeping a pure force of good like
the Specter
locked up. Like a switch has been flipped, nearby police suddenly become oddly listless. Instead of working, they just chat with each other and random citizens about the weather. Some watch SCP Explained on their phone while active robberies are happening. A man is mugged right in front of a squad car and the cop inside just listens to his Van Halen CDs at max volume. In actual precincts, the on-duty cops start to wonder why on earth they're actually here. In this building, all together, listening to phone calls from weirdly panicked people and typing up reports on stuff? It all just seems oddly confusing. They decide to go outside and watch clouds or go home and play video games. It doesn't make any sense that they're just standing around in here doing nothing for no reason. Across the city, strange incidents start to occur. People who so much as knock into each other while walking on the crowded New York streets begin to brawl with one another on the ground, while nobody around them even really acknowledges that they're doing it, let alone tries to break them up. Nearby, cars crash at the intersection, and rather than getting out to exchange insurance information, the irate drivers draw guns and start to duel like bit characters in an old cowboy movie. Nobody really seems to mind. As if noticing a change in the wind, organized crime rackets decide that secrecy isn't the way to go anymore. Mob enforcers rob stores and shake down random people in the streets, taking wallets, watches, phones, and jewelry. Criminals break into people's homes and start ransacking the place, stealing everything from flat-screen TVs to priceless family heirlooms, while their owners sit on the couch, seemingly unable to even comprehend that something is going wrong here. But everything is still about to get a whole lot worse. The city breaks into riots and looting, people battling in the streets. News helicopters circle above, reporting the chaos unfolding below them. But they do so with an odd kind of detached calm, not really comprehending the full scope of what's happening or why. Just that a whole lot more is on fire now than it was before. How strange. This is the moment when the SCP Foundation realizes the meaning of
the Specter's
pleading. He really was being entirely unselfish, because you see,
the Specter
isn't just an extremely devoted crime fighter. He's the very personification of the concept of fighting crime. He can't ever be locked up or contained, because if you do, then the very concept of resisting crime fades from the human consciousness. Order ceases to be, and chaos reigns. That's why
the Specter,
also known as SCP-4494, is classified as Archon, meaning that he can't be contained, because the danger of containing him would be far greater than the danger of letting him roam around and do his thing unhindered. He maintains an amicable relationship with the SCP Foundation after everything that happened, willing to swoop in and help their agents when they're in a bind, and need a little hand from a true hero. And when he's not fighting crime, he relaxes in
the Specter Cave
by watching TV and playing video games. No, we're not making that up. Unsurprisingly, his favorite video games are the ones where you get to play as superheroes, though he will occasionally indulge in some Grand Theft Auto 5. Just don't expect him to break any traffic laws while he's playing. Thank you very much. So if ever you feel afraid, or if the dark forces that are all too human in this world are marshaling against you, know this: you don't fight alone. There's a man in the shadows, ready to come to your aid. He's a warrior for justice. He's a defender of the innocent. But most of all, he is
the Specter.
You're a child, awake at night. What a feeling. In your room, you cling to these rare hours of the evening and watch the hour hand crawl closer towards the parts of the clock you've never seen touched. Now you stare out your window, embracing the moon, the stars, and the darkness that engulfs them. You trace an owl's hoo-hoos up towards the densest evergreen in the neighborhood. You see a rat scurry across the top of a brick wall. You wave to your new nocturnal friends, bonded by the preference of night. Now you open your window and inhale, smelling the dark sky like chocolate cake. You hold it in as long as you can. Very soon, you know, it will all be taken from you. Not by a god or a black hole or any of the universe's hypothesized collapses. At this age, you know nothing of physical cosmology. You know nothing of the Book of Revelation. You're just a child. The forces that give and take from you are not understood through physics nor philosophy, nor through numbers nor thought experiments. Look at you. Your thumb is still pruned from having just kicked the habit of sucking it. Your pajamas are still one unified piece of clothing, cradling your entirety with fuzzy cotton. Your teddy bear is still an extension of your arm, not yet removed by maturity. You're still another 15 years from believing your life is dictated by astrological signs or personal free will or mathematical outputs. It's not that you're ignorant. In fact, you're quite bright as a child. You don't bother to comprehend the forces outside your house because you know as long as you are living inside it, they have no governance. The only true comes from within, from the two gods you have seen with your very own eyes, sitting on the ribbed sofa in gray sweatpants, watching a show about rich people drinking mimosas on boats in the Mediterranean. The almighty parents, rulers of everything. And with just one compound word called up the stairs, they have the power to take everything away from you. Bedtime. And suddenly the curtains are pulled over the world you long for. Now it's not the stars, but the ceiling you're staring at. But thankfully, you are not alone. You pull your teddy bear out from its hibernation beneath your armpit, and you hug him gently, careful not to squeeze out his stuffing. Laying there, you can't help but wonder how your bear got like this, so beaten and bruised, torn up like a dog toy, one eye dangling from a string. His left leg bends forward, impersonating the joint structures of a flamingo. Yet, as far as you know, your best pal has done nothing but sleep. How is he so battered? Can hibernation be that taxing? Do teddy bears expire? The questions for now must be ignored. You lay there together in your bed, fighting the feelings of slumber, almost as if rebelling against mom and dad's tyranny. Thinking deeply only makes you sleepier, and tonight, you insist on staying awake. It's 9:30, and you've yet to be sucked into a dream, and that in itself is a small victory. But your parents' wishes will not be evaded that easily, if ever. They fight back by turning on the air conditioning. The soft rhythmic humming of the white noise weighs on your eyes, and soon you can't resist it any longer. Sleep sneaks up on you. The battle is lost. A safe 10 minutes later, your parents poke their heads into your room and see your body stiff and motionless, wrapped in sheets like a mummy. They celebrate their victory with a quick kiss and go back to the sofa to rest like gods on the 7th day. And while you are sleeping, dreaming of a tomorrow where you don't surrender to the same powers, there is yet another battle to be fought. And if all goes well, you'll sleep right through it. But some children won't be so lucky. On July 7th, 2001, a Portland, Oregon news headline reported a young boy missing from home in the middle of the night. His parents were quick to respond that their son wasn't the type of boy to go wandering out into the dark, and that something suspicious was sure to be discovered there in his bedroom. The first thing noticed was his stuffed animal, a jovial orca torn to shreds.
its stuffing scattered across the carpet. Its head and body were stationed in the corner nearest the bed, soaked in a black substance similar to ink, its eyes damp with water. The boy, however, was not to be found. As the parents held their son's dismantled orca in their hands, feeling the weight of mortality, they combed their fingers through the stuffed animal's organs, as if giving it an impromptu autopsy, trying to determine what kind of beast could have done this. But it wasn't justice for the orca they were after. By the time we are old enough to be parents, we've outgrown empathy for our inanimate counterparts. For them, the orca was simply a representation of the cruel fate that may have also been bestowed on their child. Its death was only respected for how it related to the living, and so the poor orca was set aside, forgotten about, until investigators called upon the Foundation to intervene, at which point MTF Iota 12 were dispatched. It revealed that the young boy's room had large trails of viscous black liquid streaking the walls, the very same liquid found on the orca. But where did this liquid come from? Unfortunately, there was no camera footage to give us the answer. Neither were there eyewitness reports or any residual signs of what specifically occurred. Neighbors who were awake reported hearing the thumping from the room, which, as expected, was useless bystander insight, leading to nothing more than a series of rumors and speculations. Maybe it was an extremely localized earthquake. Maybe he was just throwing a temper tantrum. But where does maybe this, maybe that lead us to? Can factual answers ever come from this level of uncertainty? Well, one specific maybe, just may be, the key to cracking this case. Allow me to explain. 2 days after the event, the child was rediscovered, unconscious behind a hedge in the family's garden. A brief interview revealed that the child witnessed the final minutes of what he described as an intense battle. He claimed, "My orca was fighting a big monster, and then the monster grabbed me and took me out the window. But someone saw it, so it dropped me, and I hid in the bush." A second interview revealed no other discoveries, but the child claimed that the monster ate his socks. Initial reactions to the two interviews were as expected. Adults reasoned the claims were imaginary, a fabrication of the child's mind manifested to protect himself from whatever the real trauma endured actually was. But heard beneath the skeptical murmurs of jaded grown-ups enslaved by their narrow perceptions was one individual who dared to suggest, maybe, just maybe, the boy is telling the truth. And it was in the spirit of this hopeful and trusting maybe that the Foundation would prove the boy's story to be truth. And the truth would be known as SCP-6330. SCP-6330 is a phenomenon affecting stuffed animals worldwide, though it is most common in teddy bears. Manifestation of this phenomenon is referred to as a sleepwalker event, occurring only within the households of families with young children, typically between the ages of 1 to 14. While you're asleep, vulnerable to what lingers awake, your favorite stuffed animal may find life, impulsively combating enemies referred to as SCP-6330-2. These creatures typically blend with shadows, though this mechanism is poorly understood. They somewhat resemble creatures associated with fantasy, such as dragons or ogres, always manifesting beneath your bed, no matter how messy or clean it might be. SCP-6330-2 instances depict behavior indicating that they intend to hurt or prey upon the sleeping child. And it isn't nightlights or security systems that stop them, but rather SCP-6330-1s. SCP-6330-1 are stuffed animals already present in a child's room that seem to be non-anomalous prior to SCP-6330-2 manifestations. SCP-6330-1 has been shown to instantaneously manifest small wooden weaponry in order to combat SCP-6330-2 to protect their child. Battles have been shown to last upwards of 20 minutes and are always near silent. There is an unspoken agreement between both sides to keep their history concealed as best as they can. In observed cases, SCP-6330-1 have emerged victorious, though are severely wounded during the skirmish. Torn wool and stuffing are common, and following all known events, SCP-6330-1 have died due to their injuries, but only after sacrificing themselves for the safety of the child. Prior to death, the instance will drag the SCP-6330-2's corpse back under the bed frame and demanifest.
To understand this, the Foundation has conducted just one test. Given the volatile nature of recreating the events, the Foundation did not push their luck with subsequent studies, and so it's the lone research done in 1987 on Site-44 that they still lean on to this day to understand SCP-6330 and the instances that come with it. It began with a researcher volunteering his 7-year-old daughter, henceforth referred to as Subject, to be placed in a humanoid containment room and soothed to sleep using a teddy bear that she had a strong emotional attachment to. For 12 straight tests, our subject was observed to sleep through the night peacefully, her environment remaining in alignment with the trivialities of deep sleep. But on the 13th study, something would happen, something very unsettling, even for the Foundation standards. MTF Iota-12 were stationed at the room's entrance for swift intervention if needed, and until that 13th attempt, they felt their focus to be pointless. Approaching the 3rd hour, however, they felt a subtle and unexplained value in their presence. They felt something coming on, that feeling while danger is looming, that feeling that makes you clench your fists just in case. And just as they made eye contact with one another to acknowledge this shared feeling within the group, a quiet rustling sound was heard beneath the bed, and sounds reminiscent of a large animal's breathing became audible. Suddenly, a pair of large, scaly, clawed hands grasped the rim of the bed frame. A creature resembling a western dragon emerged. But was it actually a dragon? Were the sheets ready to be blasted to flames? If slain, would the necks regrow and multiply by the hundreds? These thoughts raced through MTF Iota-12's head. One member instinctually ran for the door to go protect the child, but he was held back and restrained, reminded that the success of the experiment was dependent on letting the situation play out naturally. He was hard to console. Patience at this moment did not feel like a virtue. It felt irresponsible. A creature standing approximately 3 meters above the ground, switching between bipedal and quadrupedal motion, was stalking a sleeping child, and they were instructed to simply watch. For 5 minutes, the SCP-6330-2 patrolled the room, moving silently and methodically, unaware of the surveillance cameras. Then SCP-6330-2 turned towards the subject, positioning itself at the foot of the bed, stretching its arms out towards the subject. It gaped its jaws wide, exposing rows of large pointed teeth and a dark pink tongue. It looked like a snake in a field of mice. As it prepared to lunge at the subject, MTF Iota-12 was ready to intervene. But before they could, the stuffed bear stood up on the subject's chest and drew a small sword and shield from an unknown source, almost magically, like switching weapons in an old Zelda video game. It positioned its sword's tip downward and held its shield at its side. SCP-6330-1 hunched over slightly and twirled its sword, maintaining eye contact with SCP-6330-2 the entire way through. After 10 seconds, the SCP-6330-2 threw its jaws at the subject, and SCP-6330-1 responds with a leap towards the subject's attacker, slicing SCP-6330-2's eye. The SCP-6330-2 responds with a quiet grunt and touches its wound, which leaks a viscous black liquid. The SCP-6330-1 jumps towards SCP-6330-2 and, mid-battle, uses fabric from the bedsheets to quickly stitch the wound, attempting to minimize mess and proof of its presence. Both instances went to battle for 9 minutes before the first signs of damage to SCP-6330-1. Following the severing of one of SCP-6330-2's dorsal spikes, it strikes the SCP-6330-1 with a heavy slap, which sends SCP-6330-1 across the room. It stands back up, placing a hand on its stomach, and looks at its hand, which is now covered in wool and stuffing. They charge at each other once again, but as the subject moves slightly in her sleep, both instances stop and quickly agree on peace until the subject settles. When that happens, the instances resume fighting. Research notes that while the battle is genuine, there is an element of guidance. They do not follow a script, but it appears they follow a code. While both anomalies welcome the conflict brought on by the other, neither wants it broadcasted to the public. After 20 minutes of battle, both instances are heavily scarred and injured. After kicking itself off of the SCP-6330-2's nose, SCP-6330-1 sprints from one side of the room towards SCP-6330-2, leaping into the air and landing a fatal blow slicing the neck of the other instance, which falls lifeless to the floor. SCP-6330-2 is dragged by the SCP-6330-1 back under the bed. A short while later, the SCP-6330-1 emerges. Damage sustained includes loss of one buttoned eye, exposed stuffing, and torn wool. It places its sword and broken shield on a nearby nightstand. SCP-6330-1 then drags itself up the bedsheets towards the subject, who was sleeping peacefully throughout the test. It rests beside the child lying motionless. It seems to glare directly at the camera, and a small digit protrudes from its round hand, giving a thumbs up to the researchers. Its head flops onto the child's cheek before it ceases to move. The father who risked his daughter for research is pleased with the discoveries regarding both anomalies, but it brings about a new set of questions concerning children and their relationship with the dark. These very thoughts you might even wonder yourself. Maybe a kid's desire to stay up past bedtime isn't so much about wanting to watch cartoons with curse words or read Calvin and Hobbes. Maybe it's not about a desire to be awake at all, but rather a subconscious fear of being asleep. Maybe our senses as children are heightened to the anomalies that creep about. Maybe all the fabled fears of children aren't fairy tales after all. And maybe mom and dad checking under our bed is just performance parenting. Because even if something were there, would they even be able to see it? Or is everything beyond an adult's understanding misattributed to the imagination? As we age, does our perception of how reality should look alter the reality that is actually there? Do we indeed see clearer with our expensive glasses from our high-rise office space? Or did we see more accurately in the glow of our action figure nightlight, spying through stitches in our blankets, looking past crusty eye boogers at what moved in the shadows? It is hard to ever know. For every real encounter a child has with an SCP-6330, there might be hundreds of falsehoods. The ratio is truly impossible to calculate. But as long as teddy bears are universal, so too are their anomalous enemies. And so where does that fact leave us? How do we go forward? Should we be afraid to put our children to sleep? Afraid of the monsters under their bed? I don't think that's what our hero would want. Sometimes we have to learn to trust things, even if we don't understand them. Like gravity or multiplication. We have to trust that the relationship between children and their stuffed animals are in fact real. We have to learn their loyalty is reciprocated, even if the adult world has taught us otherwise. And if we ever need a reminder of these lessons, we can look to Event 184 in Cambridge, England, where we have our first recording of a sleepwalker event outside of controlled testing, and also our first piece of evidence proving SCP-6330-1 to understand language and how to use it to connect with humans in ways beyond being cute and cuddly. On November 11, 2008, a call was filed to local authorities by a family who claimed to have discovered footage of a sleepwalker event within their son's room. Mobile Task Force Iota-12 lucid dreamers were dispatched to investigate. Immediately, the footage was seized by personnel, and all members of the family were administered Class A amnestics. The child's bed swayed lightly as an instance of SCP-6330-2 emerges. The instance resembles an unknown creature, though it is described as having a large muscular frame. The instance walks to the opposite end of the room, hunching over and observing the child for exactly 10 minutes. As the SCP-6330-2 begins to stand further upright, it extends a retractable set of claws. Then, the child's teddy bear suddenly stands, drawing a bow and quiver. SCP-6330-2 assumes a quadrupedal stance and snarls before lunging towards the bed. The SCP-6330-1 fires a single arrow towards the SCP-6330-2, striking the instance directly in its canine-like snout. SCP-6330-2 responds with a loud huff, reminiscent of that of a bull or bovine. The instances battle for approximately 30 minutes, the longest recorded sleepwalker event to date. Both show abilities and skill sets consistent with other SCP-6330-1 and -2 instances. Eventually, SCP-6330-2 has SCP-6330-1 pinned to a nearby wall and tries to strangle it. The SCP-6330-2 then pulls one of SCP-6330-1's arrows from its arm, plunging it into the -1's chest. Then the -2 leans its head towards the -1 and whispers into the instance's right ear. though audio recordings cannot determine exactly what was vocalized. The SCP-6330-1 lifts up its head, staring blankly into SCP-6330-2's eyes. It reaches behind its back, pulling out a small, entirely wooden Glock 19 handgun. The bear points the weapon into SCP-6330-2's forehead and fires. The shot is silent, and the SCP-6330-2's body falls limp. Black viscous fluid sprays onto the wall. The SCP-6330-1 hauls SCP-6330-2's corpse towards the bed, noticeably limping. It drags the body by its large forearm and demanifests upon reaching the underneath of the bed. SCP-6330-1 returns and briefly stares around the room before turning to the child. It climbs up a desk and finds a piece of paper and a pen. It goes on to write the following note.
Hello, Timothy. Thank you for always taking care of me. It really was fun. I was able to repay the favor of protecting you. Unfortunately, I am hurt. I need to go. I'm too weak to stay, and I just hope you'll remember me. It's been fun helping you. I've enjoyed my time under your care. Going into this, I knew it would happen. The sleepwalker's coming for you. I'm just happy I could do my job. Goodbye, my friend. I hope I may see you soon.
Fatigue can be a killer on the roads. On long cross-country drives, a few hours of rest can be the only thing between you and a fiery wreck. But if you're a Foundation employee, or former employee, taking a break from your drive could prove to be even more deadly, all because of the entity known as SCP-7819. SCP-7819 manifests itself as a small, seemingly ordinary roadside motel called the Rest Easy Inn. It can appear on any exit on any highway, anywhere in the continental United States. Though it can appear anywhere, it seems to need very specific factors in order to manifest. This anomaly is only visible to former or current Foundation employees, and will only appear if they're alone in the car. It can also only appear between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m., and only after the victim has been driving for at least 5 hours. When the victim nears the exit for SCP-7819, an overwhelming wave of fatigue washes over them, but it is unclear if that's an effect of the SCP or just the natural reaction to seeing an exit for a motel on a long drive. Either way, the victim will start to feel drawn towards the warm, comforting glow of the Rest Easy Inn's vacancy sign. Perhaps they're able to resist the urge to stop. Maybe they already have accommodations arranged a few miles down the road, or maybe they just really need to get where they're going before sunrise. That doesn't mean they're safe just yet. Every turn on the dark road feels the same mile marker, the same gnarled tree, until the neon sign for the Rest Easy Inn reappears like a specter in the dark. Is it exhaustion? Deja vu? No, it's worse. The motel has rewound their journey, trapping them in a looping nightmare, and there is no escape. It's going to keep doing it until they finally take the exit, park outside the motel, and get out of the car. The only way out is to pull over and step into the cold shadows of the Rest Easy Inn. Fortunately, the SCP Foundation has developed a step-by-step guide on what exactly you have to do to survive an encounter with SCP-7819. The first step is to park your car. If possible, don't leave too many spaces between yourself and the other cars in the lot. You want to blend in as much as possible and avoid being singled out. Take only what you need with you: phone, keys, wallet, handbag. Don't bother with any overnight bag or luggage you might have on you. It'll only slow you down. Even though you might be tempted to bring any firearms you might have in the car, don't. Before you enter the lobby, pay attention to the layout of the parking lot. Look for inconsistent or impossible details in the other cars. Is the license plate written in gibberish? Does it come from a state that doesn't exist? Maybe one car is made completely of wood, or there's one that doesn't have any doors. Don't try and look inside the cars. You won't like what you see. You might notice a vehicle in the parking lot that is on fire. Don't stop. Don't investigate. Don't wait around for the fire to go out. Keep your eyes ahead and go into the motel lobby as though your life depends on it. It probably does. The lobby desk will be unoccupied. You can try ringing the bell once, but only do it once. nothing will happen, but you still shouldn't exit. If the silence becomes too oppressive, hum your favorite song. That's when you'll hear it, a banging sound. If you hop over the desk, you'll find that the source of this banging is a closed door, which will rattle as if someone is trying to open it. Listen closely. The sounds behind the door are not random. They shift and change. They are unique to each victim. One Foundation agent reported that she heard wet slaps, coughs, and pained moaning coming from the other side of the door. Listen for the sounds getting louder. When that happens, knock forcefully on the door in response. Don't say anything. Just keep knocking until whatever is on the other side slides a room key through the gap. Keep knocking until you get your key, and once you have it, don't forget to say thank you. Only then can you leave the lobby, quickly and without looking back. At the Rest Easy Inn, stairs do not exist. If you want to reach your room, the elevator is your only choice. The buttons are not numbered clearly, and they are arranged in a chaotic pattern, making it difficult to find your own way. But you won't be alone. Someone or something will already be inside, waiting for you. Step in, but never look away. Keep your eyes locked on them and press your back firmly against the wall. But if you get to the elevator and a well-dressed old man is waiting for you, do not get in under any circumstances. He will hold the door for you and ask you to enter, and he will wait for up to several minutes for you to respond before giving up. Do not cross the threshold. He can't get you if you are outside the elevator. But remember to be polite. Thank him, but tell him that you're just passing through, and you're happy to wait for the next one. Eventually, he'll give up and move on. If you get to the elevator and a middle-aged woman in hiking gear is waiting, you can get in. The ride might stretch on for what feels like half an hour, but you will reach your floor eventually. Stay composed. If she speaks to you, and she will, respond politely, but never with the truth. No matter how trivial or absurd her questions seem, lie. Invent stories, tell lies, anything but the truth. You don't want her to know who you really are. If the person waiting for you in the elevator is a young vagrant, it is also safe to enter. This person will not speak, but if they offer you a hug, it will do you no harm to accept. When you leave the elevator, the vagrant will give you a small gift, like a tin toy or a box of matches. Hold on to that gift in case you need it later. Once you get to your floor, it is useless to try and read the room key. It will either have no number or a nonsensical number. Just start walking down the hallway and wait for the room to reveal itself to you. Do not try any of the doors or look through the peepholes. Just like in the parking lot, you should avoid drawing attention to yourself. Just keep your head down and walk straight ahead, even if you start to feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up like someone's right behind you. Resist the urge to glance behind you. It is not worth what you might see. And of course, don't make any noise. And whatever you do, stay silent. Disturbing the other guests would not only be rude, it would be dangerous. You'll be walking for a long time, much longer than you'd expect given the outside dimensions of the motel. The wallpaper and carpet colors will change. The doors will start to get higher up on the walls. A creeping disorientation will set in, like you've been transported somewhere else. But stay calm and just keep walking. Despite the hallway's endless twists and impossible angles, it will inevitably funnel you towards a crossroads. You might be confused about what direction to take, but don't wait too long. This is an impossible space, and standing around will lead to headaches and a sense of acute paranoia. Don't overthink it. Your choice won't change the outcome. Pick a direction at random, as if the path is already chosen for you. Keep moving, even as the hallway stretches and shifts around you, until you see the door that feels like it's waiting for you. Enter the room using your key. The room will feel cold, but that's normal. Don't let the door close behind you. Not until you've turned on every light, searched every closet, behind every curtain, and under the bed. Once you're absolutely sure that you're the only person in the room, shut the door and lock it. If your room has a door to an adjoining room, push a piece of furniture in front of it. The bathroom door might be locked as if someone or something is inside. There's no need to worry, unless faint noises drift from the other side, or an unfamiliar shadow shifts under the door. In that case, push some furniture in front of that door too. If the bathroom isn't locked, you'll find that the plumbing doesn't work. It feels like a prop. As one researcher described it, the room resembles a display in a furniture showroom or movie set. The layout of each room varies depending on the victim, but it's always strange and idiosyncratic in some way. There might be too many chairs or mismatched furniture styles and colors. There may be too many beds and nothing else, or furniture placed haphazardly with no easy way to walk around them. No matter how strange your room is, you should try your best to get comfortable. After all, you're going to be here all night, and you're very, very tired. Turn on the TV if you have one. It'll help you relax. Dim the lights, but don't turn them off. Get under the covers and settle in. Hold on. Did you check under the bed earlier? Maybe you should do that again to be safe. You'll wake up submerged in warm, still water in a hot tub, the only person in an eerily quiet pool room. There will be a radio on a nearby table. The signal is bad, but you recognize the song from when you were a child. You might feel compelled to adjust the dial on the radio and get a better signal. If you decide to do that, be very careful not to change the station. What's playing now is meant for you, and tuning to anything else might attract unwanted attention. If you like, you can walk around and inspect the pool, which has a strange shape. We'd advise against taking a dip. If you touch the surface of the water, you'll find that it's covered in a thick membrane to stop things from breaking through. If you were to cannonball in, you'd be stuck under that membrane and drown. Don't pay too much attention to the shapes moving around under the surface, even if they look like people, even if you hear them banging on the membrane and shrieking like wild animals. Get back into the hot tub. It won't be warm anymore. It will be freezing cold. Despite this, put your head under the water. When you do this, you'll see that it's much, much deeper than you thought. There will be something at the bottom. Take a deep breath and swim down to pick it up. When you get out of the tub, inspect what you found. It'll be something valuable that you thought you'd lost a long time ago. One researcher, for example, found her engagement ring, which she'd flushed down the toilet years ago. Whatever it is for you, hold on to this item for later too. When you're ready to leave the pool, your clothes are clean and dry and folded neatly for you on the table. Once you're dressed, head back to your room. You'll have to pass through the lobby, which is where you'll see the breakfast room. You could have sworn it was still night, but the lights are on and it seems like they've started serving breakfast. Go in and have a look around. Don't pay attention to the food available at the buffet. Most of it won't be edible. You'll see another solitary person sitting at a table. Join them while they have their meal. This person will greet you warmly and make friendly conversation. They'll ask you to stay, and you should politely but firmly decline. If they ask you how you're enjoying your stay, say that it's fine, but you'll be leaving soon. They will ask if they can do anything to make your stay better. Say no. Resist the urge to feel guilty about this, even though this person seems very nice. Deny every time they ask. Always remind them that you want to leave, and keep doing so until they stop asking. This person might still be there when you check out tomorrow, if the breakfast room isn't closed. They'll still be alone. Avoid becoming sentimental. When you go back to your room, you'll fall asleep again. And when you wake up this time, it will actually be morning. You'll notice that this motel looks very different in the daylight. The hallways don't twist and turn. The carpet doesn't change. Everything that seemed weird or frightening about the place during the night will have vanished, and you will feel like you're in any ordinary roadside motel. In the cold light of day, you might convince yourself it was all a dream, if not for the trinket from the vagrant still nestled in your pocket, and the keepsake from the hot tub. As you walk down the boring beige hallway, many of the doors that were locked last night will be hanging open. There will be cleaning carts in the hallway, but you won't see any staff or other guests. There won't be anybody in the elevator either, and the front desk will still be unattended. But unlike last night, you won't hear any mysterious banging from behind the desk, just the hum of the air conditioning and the buzz of the fluorescent lamps. You don't need to pay. All you need to do is put your key on the front desk, and then you'll be free to go. When you go outside, the strange cars will be gone, and your car will be exactly where you left it. Get in and drive away. Once you're on the road, if you look in your rearview mirror, the motel will no longer be visible. SCP-7819's origin is still a total mystery. We might never know why it only manifests to Foundation employees, or what it does to the people who don't make it to checkout. But this anomaly is pretty clear about what it wants. It wants people to stay there. Researcher Taya Andrews put it best in her report regarding her personal experience with SCP-7819. Motels are not home, obviously. They try their best to feel like they're home, but not particularly well. 7819 embodies that pretty well. Something that doesn't really understand humans trying fruitlessly to lure them in with fractured memories of motel rooms and hot tubs. And who knows, maybe if you don't follow the rules, nothing bad happens at all. Maybe the people who disappeared into SCP-7819 just decided they wanted to stay.